161. Night Talk. The feast ended, and the prefects shepherded the new students back to their common rooms, taking the chance to pass along the essentials, passwords, schedules, where the rooms were. Loren, however, planned to detour to the headmaster's office. He felt he should tell Dumbledore about the talking diary and his conversation with Lord Voldemort. There were questions Flamel hadn't answered, about Morgan, about sages, about gods, that Dumbledore might know. Besides, even if the diary had been burned to ash, it had been used to try to reopen the Chamber of Secrets and release a basilisk. Better to inform the headmaster so Hogwarts could be prepared for any dangerous creatures. He followed the procession, intending to peel off on the 7th floor. Percy, solemn as ever, gave the new students the standard warning. "If you don't want to be lectured on your first day, wake up an hour earlier," he said, deadpan, making the newcomers think the prefect was in a foul mood. Seamus elbowed Loren. "What's up with Percy? He wasn't like that last year." "Don't you know?" Seamus wagged his eyebrows. "Harry and Ron came in on a flying car. It's in the paper." Dean's voice from the side was a single excited note. "That's just too cool." Hermione, a few paces away, was slower to catch on. "What's cool about losing points?" she asked, aghast. "It means Gryffindor will start the term down." Seamus and Dean looked at her as if she were deliberately obtuse. She blinked, bewildered. Loren patted her shoulder in sympathy. "I don't get it either," he said. Their banter trailed up to the 7th floor landing, where the portrait hole to Gryffindor yawled open. Loren slipped away. The headmaster's office was on his route back to the common room. Dumbledore had a habit of drinking a cup of hot cocoa after dinner. It helped him fall asleep sooner. Tonight he was stirring in a few extra spoonfuls of honey, stirring clockwise with the same thoughtful slowness he always used, aiming for that perfect temperature, just a bit above skin warm, pleasingly scalding. Fawkes preened on his perch, and the portraits of former headmasters were turned to face the walls. Dumbledore, in a dark gray nightgown and pointed hat, his half-moon spectacles perched on the tip of his nose, peered over the rim of his cup. Loren burst into the office with more swagger than he felt and dropped into a chair. For a moment, words failed him. He had to be careful. He couldn't blurt out everything he knew about plot-woven destinies and Horcruxes, but he needed to tell enough about the diary and the chamber. Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. "For an old man, the evening hours are precious. If you have something to say, Loren, be quick." Loren took a breath. "On the day we were in Diagon Alley, Lucius slipped something into Ginny's book. I found it." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "It's a diary that talks. It belonged to Tom Riddle 50 years ago." Dumbledore's spoon clicked against his cup. Loren continued, as calmly as he could. "It looked into my memories. I learned things from it. Abraham's curse burned it to ashes." Dumbledore listened without interrupting, but his fingers had stopped tapping the cup. When Loren went on, "There is an entrance to the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets through the girls' lavatory on the 2nd floor, and it opens with Parseltongue. A 1,000-year-old basilisk sleeps down there." Dumbledore set his cup down and let a ripple of recognition pass through him. Dumbledore's face changed as connections snapped into place. Myrtle's death, Hagrid's wrongful accusation, Tom Riddle's heritage. He looked at Loren, seeing a boy who was still just that, despite the strange things he'd encountered. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "The basilisk will be dealt with. Hogwarts is responsible for the safety of every pupil." Loren shifted. "There are other things I want to ask you." He hesitated. Flamel hadn't answered some of his questions. Perhaps Dumbledore would. "The diary. It said I was a descendant of Morgan, a sage of old. It said I should become a god with him and gain eternal life. Who is Morgan? What is a sage? What is a god?" Dumbledore's fingers tapped the armrest once, twice. "If you don't mind, I'd like to know how he tempted you," he said after a moment, with the idle curiosity of the very old. Loren relaxed and told him. "He said some people are born to be noble, to lead an age, to guide wizards to rule muggles and elevate humanity. He asked me to join him, to become a god, to live forever and make the rules." Dumbledore studied the 16-year-old across from him and then asked, gently, "And what do you think of all that? Of wizards ruling muggles, of eternal life and godhood?" Loren waved a hand, impatient. "What do I care about muggles and wizards? That kind of thinking is just trouble. Eternal life and being a god sound like a headache. I'd rather make some money, eat well, and be comfortable every day." Dumbledore laughed, a clear, warm sound that filled the office. "If only everyone thought that way," he said, chuckling even more until a couple of portraits grumbled and Fawkes blew a warning spark toward his beard. "When it comes to gods, it's complicated. Legends upon legends," Dumbledore said when he could be heard again. "But some things I can tell you. The Philosopher's Stone is also called the Sage's Stone. Those who can make the stone, the sages, are said to be born at special times and to have tremendous influence on the world." Loren felt a small prick of uncertainty at the idea that he might have impact beyond himself. Dumbledore continued, Morgan Le Fay, was a witch of Merlin's era. There used to be a chocolate frog card about her. No one knows where she truly came from. Some say she studied with Merlin, others that she was his pupil. She had a strange tie to the merpeople. I recall you speaking with their elders when you studied their tongue. She was skilled in transfiguration, healing, and prophecy, Dumbledore added. She quarreled seriously with Merlin and then vanished from the histories. Dumbledore took a large drink of his now cool cocoa. "Does any of that help you?" he asked. Loren frowned. "Does it have anything to do with me?" Dumbledore tapped his chin. "I am not omniscient. On that point, I cannot give you an answer. That is something you may need to discover yourself." The conversation wound down into lighter chat, and then Loren rose to leave. Just as he reached the door, Dumbledore called after him. "Loren." Loren turned back at the old man's voice. The candlelight picked out Dumbledore's silver beard and lined face. "In a little while, I will need you to come with me somewhere. I will ask for your help." Loren grinned and waved. "Got it. Old wizards and their riddles," he thought as he left. Dumbledore said little, and yet said everything. Back in the common room, Hermione's face was a study in indignation and consternation. Her cheeks were puffed out in a way that made her look almost comically cross. Loren reached out and poked the soft puff. "I thought you'd glare at them." "Why this?" "You ask them," Hermione snapped. Harry and Ron were slumped on a sofa, both looking miserable. "Don't even mention it," Harry moaned. "Snape wouldn't let us back to the feast. He left a plate of chicken and ham sandwiches and pumpkin juice in the common room. The sandwiches refill themselves." "Isn't that a mercy?" Loren said. Ron groaned. "We thought it was punishment. We could only return after we'd eaten them." "So we kept eating until we couldn't fit another bite," Harry added. "Then Snape had to go fetch a potion to make us better enough to be seen by Professor McGonagall." Hermione's hands flew to her head. "If you'd used an owl and told a professor you were stuck, none of this would have happened." Harry and Ron pretended not to hear. After a year together, they'd learned to accept Hermione's scolds as the expression of care that they were, however annoying. "Don't mind them," Loren told her. He put his hands on Hermione's shoulders and steered her toward the portrait hole. "Go get some sleep." "But," Hermione opened her mouth to argue. "When they're better, I'll take them to the dormitory," Loren said, lingering over the promise. Hermione relented, pressing a scrap of parchment into his hand as she climbed the stairs. He unfolded it, a neatly written timetable for the year, classrooms and floor numbers all penciled in. She had done it for him, knowing he was too lazy to bother. He couldn't help smiling at the careful, tidy handwriting. A new school year had begun. Compared with the relaxed schedule of last term, this semester's workload had grown noticeably in both the number of classes and the hours. Second-year astronomy sat on Monday this year, which meant one more assignment to squeeze into the weekend. Stargazing reports could no longer be turned in on Monday or Tuesday. On the first day back, the Gryffindor second year's opening lesson was herbology, taken together with Ravenclaw. After a summer cooped up at home, the students could barely contain themselves. When you're in class, you crave vacation. When vacation finally comes, you miss the routine after only a few days. Seamus and Dean were particularly raring to go. Even though the enchanted ceiling over the Great Hall showed a gray, rainy morning, it did nothing to dampen their enthusiasm. Their voices were so loud at breakfast that even the professors at the high table could hear them. "We're in Greenhouse 3 today," Seamus announced. "I heard there are actual magical creatures in there." "Yeah, man-eating carnivorous plants, Fungi that burrow their roots into your blood to feed, Dean added, piling on the horrors. Neville shivered. Herbology, which had never worried him before, suddenly felt like potions class. Fred and George Weasley, already at breakfast, put down their spoons when they heard. Smiling, they strolled over, slung their arms around a few second years, and leaned in, turning the conversation into a performance. George, with a wonderfully spooky tone, said, "Some plants have very special conditions for growing. They need human bodies." "If you get separated in the greenhouse," Fred whispered theatrically, "vines will drag you down. Your screams won't travel through the soil. Your hands won't break free. No one will find you. And in the end, you'll become fertilizer." With their arms still hooked around the youngster's shoulders, the twins tightened their grip. Neville's face went white. He squirmed and tried to break free, but couldn't. He looked as if the vines had already dragged him under. Then, with a jump, he shoved the twins off the bench and bolted to his feet. Lee Jordan cackled. "You two deserve it." Others joined in, mocking the twins and praising Neville's sudden surge of courage. Neville's cheeks flushed red, and he fled the great hall as if to escape for good. The hubbub at the tables continued, stories of summer adventures and rumors about the new term bouncing around, until a howler from Mrs. Weasley cut through it all. The howler's roar stunned everyone into temporary silence. When it finally expelled its final shout, the hall erupted again, louder than before, because the students were still ringing in the ears and shouting to be heard. Seamus, grinning, leaned toward a pale Ron and shouted into his ear, "You get a howler every year? That's so cool." Ron's face went even paler. On the walk to the greenhouses, Rolf Scamander fell in with Loren. After last Christmas, they'd become friends. Not as close as Loren was with Harry and Ron, nor as boisterous as his friendship with Seamus and Dean, but steady and reliable. "How was your summer?" Loren asked, juggling a small ball of grass with his toes and passing it to Rolf. "We were supposed to go to the African jungle to study rare animals, but my professor had to go to France and we couldn't follow," Rolf said, catching the grass. "When he came back, he's been quiet. The whole family's worried." Loren thought of Newt Scamander, older now, and of Nicholas Flamel's death. Adults didn't always show their feelings, but losing an old friend was inevitable to stir sorrow. "Don't worry," Loren said. "You don't have to be the one to worry for them." When they reached the greenhouse, Professor Lockhart was waiting in a flowing teal robe and a green, gold-rimmed top hat perched on his gleaming hair. Impeccably clean from head to toe, he made muddy Professor Sprout, with dirt under her fingernails, look like a gardener. "Hello, everyone," Lockhart beamed. "I've just shown Professor Sprout how to treat the Homping Willow." He trailed off, leaving no doubt that he thought his herbology expertise surpassed hers. Sprout clenched her fists and told herself that this was payback for his mocking of Flitwick the day before. It didn't help much, but it made her feel a bit better. "Today we'll be in Greenhouse 3, she said through gritted teeth, and when she produced a key the size of her arm and opened the door, a wave of damp earth and fertilizer smell hit them. Underneath it were floral and grassy notes and a tang of root. Loren wasn't sure whether it was pleasant or offensive. Lockhart pinched his nose and scowled. Once inside, the students saw why Greenhouse 3 was different from 1. Most of the plants were active, vines and branches constantly swayed, and the roots seemed to loosen the soil as if the plants were breathing. The whole place felt more animal than plant, somehow alive with its own moods, joy, freedom, especially at Professor Sprout's presence. She led them to a row of deep pots and handed out protective gloves and earmuffs. Then she checked their preparation for the first lesson. "Today, we are repotting mandrakes. Can anyone tell me their properties?" Only Hermione raised her hand. Her clear voice carried across the greenhouse. "Mandrakes, or mandragora, are powerful restoratives. They are used to return people who have been transfigured or cursed to their original state, and are especially effective for treating petrification." "Very good," Sprout said. From outside, Lockhart's triumphant voice drifted faintly. "You know, celebrities are much like." Sprout bit back a retort. The plants, it seemed, shared her dislike for Lockhart. Their vines trembled and rustled, a little unsettled. Loren felt that unease in a way he couldn't explain, as if he could read the plant's mood. On impulse, he put a thought toward a woody Parthenocissus vine near the entrance. The vine, as if responding, slid a tendril around Lockhart's boot and then began to tug. "Ah! Help!" Lockhart cried, flailing as the vine curled around him. "Help! It's going to suck my blood. It's going to bury me as nutrients." He sounded exactly like someone who'd heard the twins' tales in the hall. At first, there were only a few loose tendrils he could have pulled free. Instead, he panicked and tangled himself further. Professor Sprout's lips twitched. She tried not to laugh out loud. Everyone watched Lockhart's embarrassment unfold. The Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs went quiet, their earlier jokes dying down at what felt like a very bad omen for this year's Defense Against the Dark Arts. But Loren's eyes lit up. This was his chance to be useful. He strode over, freed Lockhart from the vines, and muttered as he untangled him. "Professor, you sacrificed too much to give us a poor demonstration." Lockhart, flustered and grateful, beamed as if given the medal of the century. He took that moment to take over the story, striking the sort of heroic pose he excelled at. Then he left the greenhouse and hurried back to the castle to circulate his preferred version of the incident. Before he went, he patted Loren's shoulder with exaggerated warmth, saying everything his voice did not. Loren could have sworn there was a progress bar over Lockhart's head labeled Memory Charm, loading from 1% up to a full wipe. Loren went back to Hermione as modestly as ever. She glanced at him and in a voice meant only for him, asked, "Did you move those vines?" Loren's eyes went wide. Reading plants' minds and someone reading his? The realization hit him like a jolt. Class moved on to mandrakes. The little plants acted like fierce, squirming babies, kicking their tiny roots, lashing their leaves, nearly taking Seamus's nose off with a swing. Thanks to his uncanny rapport with plants, Loren didn't end the lesson sweating, aching, and spattered with soil the way many others did. He handled his mandrake without injury. By the time they finished, some students were exhausted or hurt. Justin Finch Fletchley chattered non-stop, drawing Harry, Ron, Loren, and Hermione into a round of conversation that kept them talking as they left. The second class was Transfiguration. Professor McGonagall's lessons were always strict, and the second-year material was tougher, Transfiguration that involved living things. Turning a beetle into a button required the caster to respect the beetle's life force. You had to make magic and life resonate like music to avoid harming the creature. "Can anyone tell me how to proceed?" McGonagall asked. Hermione shot her hand up, as usual. Loren, sitting at her side, was poking at the teaching aid beetle with his wand and flipping it over. Each time it began to right itself, he flipped it again. McGonagall looked at the contrast between Loren's casualness and Hermione's focused readiness, and her hand tightened around her wand without her meaning to. "Loren Morgan, you answer," she said calmly. Hermione felt a little stung but let her hand fall. Loren, surprised, said, "During the cast, you must always remember the elements of Transfiguration: insight, essence, and target." "Correct. 5 points to Gryffindor." McGonagall then explained how to apply the three elements in practice. Hermione thought the exchange was routine, until every time the professor asked a question she might have answered, McGonagall called on Loren instead, and Loren received the credit. By the end of the lesson, Hermione was bristling. She had been the one to raise her hand and had supported the class. Seeing McGonagall's attention given repeatedly to Loren felt like an injustice. When the bell rang, Hermione packed up and left in a huff, her resentful glare making McGonagall look faintly guilty. Before she disappeared down the corridor, McGonagall called after Loren, "Saturday evening, come to my office." Loren, halfway out the door, froze. "And bring Granger too," McGonagall added. Then, in a brief moment that surprised even her, the usually composed professor hurried from the classroom with a touch of urgency in her steps. 163. Rejuvenating Medicine. After the herbology class incident, the first years of Gryffindor and Hufflepuff had already lost most of their illusions about Lockhart. Even so, when Cornish pixies were streaming through the classroom, one of them even hanging Neville from the chandelier, and the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor abandoned his students and fled, the little wizards still could hardly believe it. "If I accidentally see his portrait now, I'll be sick to my stomach," Neville said, gnawing a chicken drumstick down to the bone. The usually timid boy's harsh words were proof of how utterly disappointed he'd become. "He keeps pulling me aside to talk about his fame in the papers," Harry complained, irritated. "Talking about himself is one thing, but he insists on dragging me into it, like we're some sort of pair of old friends sharing anecdotes." "And Colin Creevey," Ron added. "He's always trying to say hello, Harry, to Harry, and when Harry replies, he acts like he's just received a lover's answer." Colin Creevey, a first-year Gryffindor, had become obnoxiously infatuated with Harry, following him everywhere and taking secret pictures. The thought made Harry shiver. He resolved to avoid Colin if he could, but some things couldn't be avoided. Meals in the Great Hall, returning to the common room. Colin always managed to corner him and ask, bowing and pleading for an autograph. And Lockhart, seemingly practiced in some summoning trick, had a habit of appearing in Colin's photographs. A solo picture of the boy who lived inevitably turned into a portrait of the boy who lived and the flamboyant professor. Harry's helpless grimaces, as he ground his teeth, became a daily spectacle that Loren and the others secretly enjoyed. Friday evening, in the potions classroom. The Philosopher's Stone, an object that might have left this world with Nicholas Flamel, was now in Snape's possession. Loren had agreed to let Snape study it rather than let the stone sit unused as nothing more than a source for oddities such as removing the trace. Out of respect for Nicholas and trust in Snape, Loren had lent the stone before leaving Hogwarts last term to see what the potions master intended. On the workbench, everything unnecessary had been set aside. Only a cup of viscous, clear liquid and the small red stone remained. Snape bent over the table, head close, and gently scraped the stone with a silver knife. The lamplight picked out the severity on his pale face, an expression of concentration and, strangely, devotion. A few tiny red particles came away and clung to the blade. The dust was almost microscopic. Loren, eyes wide, hesitated before saying, "You don't have to be so stingy with it, you know. The stone isn't going to." Snape looked up at him with an unreadable gaze, then turned back to his work. He carefully dropped the powder into the viscous liquid. Some powder clung to the knife, so he submerged the whole blade. "The extract of slime mold duckweed from the Pantanal wetlands is currently the most effective and stable magic conductive agent we've found," he said in his usual even tone, fulfilling his duty as a teacher even amid an experiment. "It has excellent magical conductivity, but even if you poured the combined magic of 100 adult wizards into it, you'd only produce tiny bubbles." Loren brightened. "Could it be used in alchemy?" Stable and highly conductive, those qualities sounded perfect for powerful alchemical arrays. Snape didn't answer. The stone's powder dissolved into the viscous liquid, and patches of fiery red spread through the cup. Bubbles came up, and the solution began to glow and give off heat, as if boiling. The silver knife clinked against the sides of the cup as it tumbled. After a long interval, both men faced the cup with flushed faces, as if they had been staring into a bonfire. Snape first cast a freezing charm to cool the cup, then reached in and retrieved the knife. The metal felt icy to the touch. He gave the knife a small flick. A flash of magical light shot from its tip, struck the storage room wall, and was absorbed by Hogwarts's protective enchantments. "This knife now has characteristics of a wand," Loren said, astonished. Snape's brief gesture hadn't been wandless magic so much as the knife's functioning in place of a wand. The blade had acquired some wand-like qualities. Without a proper wand core or wand wood, it can only manage simple charms, and its power is nowhere near a real wand's. Snape muttered, organizing his thoughts. The viscous liquid was in a chaotic, magic-active state just now. The stone's properties were activated and transferred the extract's characteristics to the silver. His voice thickened into excitement. "This means that, under the right conditions, we can unleash the Philosopher's Stone's power." "Chaos, magic, excellent conductor." He paced, murmuring experimental conditions. The usually calm, taciturn potions master was entranced. From the moment he'd learned of the stone, something in him had shifted. The stone's reputation for making the impossible possible, the legendary elixir of life, had taken root in him. If the stone could grant life, could it bring the dead back? That possibility burrowed into Snape's heart and grew like a fever. He'd restrained himself through the holidays, keeping up appearances as Professor Severus Snape. He had only begun experimenting that Friday evening, a testament to his self-control. But now, with the stone before him and its laws-bending properties on display, he could no longer quiet his thoughts about a resurrection potion. What does immortality have to do with replacement? What exactly gets replaced? He kept muttering. Loren watched, alarmed. Professor, he burst out. Nicholas Flamel, the creator of the stone, could use it fully, and yet he only made the elixir of life. He wasn't truly immortal. His body was badly aged. A gust of wind might have broken his bones. Loren didn't want Snape to sink into delusion. If Snape became obsessed, his life's work could be ruined. Instead, those words were a match to tinder. Snape's eyes lit with a terrible light. He crouched and gripped Loren's shoulders, shaking him, and said, "You said Nicholas Flamel wasn't immortal. He was merely undead. He was only undead." The Philosopher's Stone's principle is replacement. Nicholas's elixir of life simply replaced death that hadn't yet befall him. If the replacement targets death that has already occurred, this is a resurrection potion. Loren understood. Snape wanted to use the stone to brew a potion that could reverse an already completed death, to put right the mistake of years ago and bring Lily back. Replacement. Undead. Snape laughed, a ragged, unhinged sound that stripped away the usual composed mask of the potion's master. Loren felt a chill. Holding the stone up between them like a last line of defense, Loren said, "Professor Snape, given everything, I think we should stop these experiments. Besides, death is a fundamental law. Trying to reverse it would bring disaster." "You don't understand. You simply don't understand." A tear slid from Snape's left eye. The madness fell away, revealing the raw, broken man beneath, the guilt, regret, and self-blame that had consumed him for 11 years. If only her eyes could open again, I would be willing to exchange. He didn't elaborate, but he took a deep breath, dropped to his knees in front of Loren, and said in a trembling voice, "I will not break the laws of the world. Characteristic transfer requires a target. I will be the vessel for death. Let me continue this experiment, please." For someone as proud as Severus Snape to beg like this, Loren felt as if something in his own chest tightened. He held the Philosopher's Stone in his palm and finally agreed on 3 conditions. "You must have Dumbledore's permission for this," he said. "I must be present whenever the stone is used. And during the experiment, you must live a normal life." The corridor below the dungeon was quiet as Loren left Snape's office. Shadows pooled in the corners like something that might reach out and swallow a person. Loren didn't know how he had walked. Snape's last words echoed in his mind. Characteristic transfer requires a target, and I will become the vessel for death. There will only be one update today. I bow to my readers and make no promises. I will make it up later if I can. 164. Awareness of death. The common room lights were still on, but it was late, and the usually lively room had quieted. Most of the younger students were asleep. Cool moonlight braided with the lamp glow around Hermione's reading candle. Her hair was loose, fluffy and messy. Her blue-striped pajamas looked soft and comfortable, and she was getting sleepy. She yawned, eyes heavy and a little dull. She glanced lazily toward the main door. There was no sign of movement. The infuriating Loren hadn't come back yet. She turned a page of the book on her lap and, distracted, sank into waiting. When Loren slipped in through the entrance, he found her seated cross-legged on the sofa, half asleep. Her reactions were slow, so Loren watched the light slowly appear in her eyes as she realized he had returned. Moonlight and scattered lamps were lovely, but neither compared to the sleepy look in her face. "If you're tired, go to bed. You don't have to wait up for me," Loren said as he dropped down beside her. The sudden weight made the sofa dip and threw Hermione off balance. She clutched his shoulder for a moment, slapped him playfully, and said in a soft, drowsy voice, "Who were you waiting for?" Thinking of Snape and Lily, friends turned strangers, separated by life and death, Loren felt a surge of gratitude for having someone to cherish now. On impulse, he pulled Hermione into his arms and, with his face near the girl's pale neck, murmured, "Hermione, thank you." The motion instantly chased the sleep away. Warm breath on her neck flushed Hermione with embarrassment. She couldn't meet his gaze. She wriggled free with a small whimper and fled up the stairs, stumbling and not looking back. As she reached the landing and a railing blocked his view, Loren heard her call very softly. Hagrid wants us to find him tomorrow. Why pass on a message like that? Couldn't Harry and Ron, in the same dormitory, have delivered it? Loren smiled to himself, suddenly light-hearted and almost bursting to sing. Sleep wouldn't come. He felt restless and full of energy. He hummed as he pulled the covers up and settled to read. Flamel had just finished sorting and cataloging a massive haul of Muggle medical books, so many that merely reading the titles would take months. Some of the titles were awkwardly worded. Organizing them helped Loren, but he often got sidetracked by essays on drama or aesthetic theory. Fortunately, the virtual library wasn't bound by ordinary constraints. With a gesture, he could rearrange shelves, so progress was steady enough. Flamel himself was poring over a comparison of Faust and the Divine Comedy, nodding in appreciation at the arguments. A ripple of thought coalesced in the air, and Loren's figure appeared before him. Flamel, could the Philosopher's Stone be used to make a resurrection potion? I mean, replace death as a property? Loren asked excitedly, stepping right up to him. Flamel's face grew serious. He set the book floating to the side. The idea is sound, he replied. Loren blinked in surprise. Nicholas had been trying in vain for years. He had assumed the effort would never bear fruit. Sound? Loren echoed. So it's possible? Although the idea is sound, it is almost impossible to realize, Flamel corrected gently. He summoned 2 chairs and sat Loren down. Death is an expansive, elusive concept. It's not a single, tidy property you can isolate. Even among wizards, it's more complicated. Do we define death as the heart stopping, the brain losing consciousness, the soul dissolving? Flamel projected a translucent anatomical figure from the medical atlases he had been cataloging. Muscles, organs, circulation showed in faint light. He pointed to the heart. Biologically, you can say cells stop functioning, metabolism ceases, but wizards' understanding of the body is different from Muggles'. To us, bones, muscles, and organs are sometimes treated as separate, almost modular things. With the right concept, a wizard can alter the body through magic, think Skelligro or Wiggenweld. Those are not physiological solutions in the Muggle sense, they're concept-driven. He let the projection fade and leaned back, eyes distant. When Nicholas was refining the elixir of life, Europe was in the grip of the Black Death. He spoke of the plague in a voice that carried centuries. No one, rich or poor, escaped it. A child who climbed trees one day could be covered with black spots and rotting flesh the next. People died in hours or days. Villages were emptied and cities piled with corpses. Nicholas saw thousands of deaths, and that accumulation of loss formed a concrete, terrible cognition in him. He refined the elixir of life from that understanding. Each time death approached, he found a way to transfer it, to an animal, for instance. Nicholas tried to make a resurrection potion as well, Flamel continued, but he found a clear, unbridgeable line between those who had not yet died and those who had. In the end, his understanding of death was incomplete. Many elements in his process relied on coincidence and circumstance. They were not reproducible. Flamel's gaze was full of remembrance, tributes to the lives and events he had witnessed over centuries, and to the plague that had raged 600 years ago. The disease had upended beliefs and unleashed fear, panic, and violence across the continent. Nicholas had worked in that chaos, seeking salvation from death, and his successes had been tangled with the turmoil of his time. In the headmaster's office, Professor Snape had come pleading his case for attempting resurrection. Dumbledore listened, solemn and measured, neither rushing to agree nor to refuse. After a long pause, he spoke quietly. Severus, I once longed to reverse death as well. But as I grow older, death comes closer, and the closer it comes, the more I respect its power. Death is the most universal law of life. Those who try to conquer it risk losing themselves. Snape stood in front of the desk in silence. Dumbledore, suddenly more candid, drew a tired comparison. Look at me, troubling in a mire, clutching at anything to keep myself afloat. He paused, and the question hung in the air like a challenge. What would he be willing to give up to hear Ariana laugh again? The thought startled him. He let it sit, unanswered. Oliver, it's barely dawn. Harry's shout woke the dormitory just before morning. Wood dragged Harry out of bed like a man hauling a reluctant prize, bundled in a scarlet practice robe and hauled off for training. The others blinked blearily. Before they could fully register it, Harry returned, hoisted Ron into a sack in much the same way and marched him away, shouting, "This is to get you ready for next year's Quidditch trials." Ron screamed and protested, "I don't want to be on the team anymore." But he was ultimately dragged off anyway. Harry had been through enough rough treatment to know how to give it back. He wasn't about to be merciful when it came to Quidditch. Loren fumbled back under his blankets and dozed. Oliver Wood, Gryffindor captain in 6th year, had long been obsessed with restoring Gryffindor's Quidditch glory. Time was running out for him. He had spent the holiday plotting tactics and wanted to get a head start before other teams began training. But his plans immediately hit a snag. On the way to the pitch, they ran into the Slytherin team, who claimed the field under the excuse of training a new Seeker. Draco Malfoy showed up with a set of brand new Nimbus 2001s, 7 of them, polished and gleaming, while Gryffindor's players, except for Harry's Nimbus 2000, flew on older Cleansweep 5s. It was disheartening. Malfoy's flashy equipment made Wood's prospects look poor. The Gryffindors might not even catch Slytherin's taillights on the field. The situation escalated. Marcus Flint taunted Ron, the only non-player on the field, and Ron, in a flare of temper, pulled out his wand and cast a jinx. Marcus's wristband flashed. The rebound sent green light back and struck Ron in the stomach. Later, over breakfast, Loren and Hermione walked with the breeze and in easy intimacy toward their appointment. They went to Hagrid's hut and found an absurd, worrying scene. Ron sat in the corner, pale, occasionally spitting a long, slimy slug into an iron bucket. Harry and Hagrid hovered nearby, helpless and exasperated. Ginny and Luna were wandering through the hut, peering curiously at everything. "Good morning," Hagrid bustled to his feet, setting out teacups and treacle for their visitors. "Loren, Hermione," Luna greeted them in her soft, otherworldly tone. "Come quick." Ron's turned into a slug mother. Ron, slug halfway out of his mouth, whimpered in indignation. Hermione leaned forward to see, recoiled, and then watched in dismay as the slug wriggled from inside Ron and was spat into the bucket. Harry sighed and began to retell the story for the 3rd time. "Oliver took the team off to work on strategies. I thought Hagrid might know a way to deal with whatever this is, so I brought Ron here. Ginny and Luna were just wandering near the edge of the Forbidden Forest when—" "Why not Madame Pomfrey?" Hermione asked. "The Humping Willow crash punishment hasn't even been lifted yet," Harry said. "If Ron gets into another fight, he might be expelled." Ron mumbled assent around a slug, hopeful and miserable. "He'll be fine once he finishes spitting them out," Hagrid said, offering a battered mug to Loren and handing over 2 very sticky pieces of treacle toffee. Ginny and Luna sat down. Luna watched the slugs with the same calm curiosity she showed everything. "My father studied animals," Luna said in her unhurried voice. "Frogs eat slugs." The room fell silent for a beat, then they all looked at her. Hagrid considered the idea thoughtfully. "And if there's a frog in his stomach?" "Then a snake would eat the frog," Luna replied, as if that made everything perfectly clear. "And the snake?" Hagrid asked slowly. The question hung there, absurd and worrying, as the bucket filled with slimy evidence and the morning light crept into Hagrid's hut. 165. Professor McGonagall's Reform. "Well, I've seen many living Buddhas, but this was my first time seeing a living king of hell." To spare Ron a second psychological shock, Loren interrupted their conversation. "If it's the effect of a charm, a counter-charm might work." He pulled out his wand and aimed a few counter-charms at Ron's stomach. Everyone circled around, staring at Ron's midsection as if he were some rare exhibit. For a few seconds, Ron felt like an animal in a menagerie. He looked blankly at the people around him, then down at the slugs in the bucket. After a moment's hesitation, he blew out another slug. This one was much smaller than the others. At least the counter-charm had done something. It meant Ron wouldn't be doomed to be a slug mother forever. The onlookers relaxed and began to enjoy the refreshments Hagrid had laid out. "Marcus has a bracelet that deflects charms," Harry tried to say, but the treacle toffee Hagrid had made stuck his teeth together. Ginny caught the beginning of his sentence and finished his thought. "Pure-blood families often have protective gear. Bracelets that deflect dark charms aren't uncommon. He should learn some of his mum's charms. A bracelet can't defend against—" Her last words came out muffled. Ginny glanced at Harry, who was pulling at the toffee with a grimace, and suppressed a laugh. She didn't want to admit she was thinking of the bat bogey hex or her mother's specialty, the reductor curse. It didn't seem very ladylike to say out loud. Loren watched Harry's distorted face and found it amusing. He reached for a piece of treacle toffee and with a grin popped it into Hermione's mouth before she could finish speaking. Hermione's protest died in a mouthful of sticky sugar. Her teeth stuck together, and she could only make muffled sounds. She stared at Loren, wide-eyed with disbelief, her face flushing. The others replayed the moment silently, stunned by the prank. Hermione sprang up, fists clenched, furious. "That was a joke! A joke!" Loren laughed and darted for the door, overcome by a sudden mischievous impulse. Apparition hadn't been practiced yet. He didn't have that option, but fearing Hermione's enhanced agility and the contents of that questionable book on magic he'd glimpsed, Loren bolted out of Hagrid's hut and ran toward the castle. Hermione sealed her lips to keep from drooling and gave chase, her muffled cries following him down the path. Harry and Ron watched them go and, for some reason, felt as if something cottony had been shoved into their mouths. They hadn't eaten that much, yet they felt oddly full. "They've got a lot of energy," Hagrid chuckled, rousing himself. "Don't stay cooped up in the hut. Come on, I'll show you the pumpkins I've grown." The Quidditch pitch changing room. After his first training session, Draco peeled off his sweat-soaked team robes and put on his Slytherin robes. His place on the team had been arranged in a way that felt like pulling strings, but Draco didn't feel inferior to Harry. If Harry could be Seeker, Draco could do as well. Today's practice had proved it, and he was in a good mood. Crabbe came in from the doorway with an odd look and said in a strange tone, "You certainly made a splash today. You must be proud, right?" A shiver ran down Draco's neck. He studied Crabbe. Something about him felt off. There are no eternal enemies, only eternal interests, Draco thought, remembering things his father had said over the holidays. He swallowed and forced a calm smile. "If you want to join the team, I can let you train with us. Tryouts are next year. You could join then." Crabbe's grin stretched monstrously. "Is this your charity, Mr. Malfoy?" Crabbe wasn't behaving normally. In an instant, Draco's mind flashed through snippets. The centaur's conversation with Potter, his father's anger at old Crabbe, the strange rumors over the holiday. There seemed to be a faint thread connecting them, but Draco couldn't quite follow it. He steadied himself as if by instinct, tidied his robes, and avoided Crabbe's eyes. "Why would I do something like that?" he asked lightly. "Because you're hobnobbing with muggle-borns and half-bloods. I thought you'd abandoned us purebloods." Crabbe's expression was brutal. Draco tried to remember the arrogant, pure-blood-worshipping version of himself from a year ago and played the part. "I only spoke to Harry Potter because of his fame and because he's a pureblood. He's associating with muggles now. It's disgusting." Crabbe lingered in the doorway, uncertain whether to stay or go. Draco slung his team robes into his bag and sauntered out, casting one haughty, contemptuous glance over his shoulder. "Next week, bring Goyle. I'll train you both in Quidditch." Watching Draco walk away, Crabbe felt torn, confused but tempted by the offer. The robes around him rustled, and a thin, red-marked snake slithered from his collar. Compared to Crabbe's recent changes, Lord Voldemort was in an unusually pleasant mood. The crude increase in Crabbe's cunning, from mindless ferocity to sly malice, matched what Voldemort had hoped for. The plan to create Horcruxes in living beings had been provocative but compelling. It only needed the right container. Voldemort hadn't intended Crabbe to be the first living Horcrux. How could such a crude, simple-minded wizard be worthy of his soul? If given the chance, he would have chosen a better vessel. Still, the current situation looked promising. The next step was to split off another piece of soul. Night. The corridor outside the Transfiguration Professor's office. Hermione walked ahead, humming a Muggle pop tune and occasionally licking her lips to taste the lingering treacle. A faint soreness pricked her thigh, but she was in a good mood. Loren trailed behind, hand pressed to the right side of his neck, making occasional hiss, hiss noises. "If you scissor-kick my neck again, I won't let you get away with it." Loren grumbled. "Humph, who told you to tease me?" Hermione tossed her head, unrepentant. "Did Professor McGonagall say why she wanted us here?" We'll find out once we go in, Loren knocked. Come in. They pushed open the door and found Professor McGonagall correcting homework, quill scratching. The life of a professor, it seemed, was an endless loop of lesson plans, teaching, homework, and more correcting, especially with Dumbledore's tendency to slack off, leaving the vice principal to handle much of the administration. McGonagall sometimes daydreamed about the day she would be principal and the sweet revenge she'd take on her future vice principal. "As I suspected," she said when she saw them. She slipped her quill into the ink bottle, rose from her desk, and led them into the little partitioned sitting room off her office. Professors' offices usually had partitions as snug rest areas. Snape had converted his into a storeroom and laboratory. McGonagall's was warm and homely, an orange-yellow sofa, soft light, little wooden houses on the walls, cotton-filled cushions in a corner next to empty cardboard boxes. Loren's eyes swept the room, and he smiled at the cat-like professor's revealed domesticity. McGonagall set a tray of apple juice in front of them and sat opposite. "I wanted to speak to you about something important." Loren and Hermione accepted their cups and waited. Hogwarts runs for 7 years, and each year is split among 4 houses. Usually 2 houses take lessons together. Facing 7 years, the professors are a bit overwhelmed. Loren had noticed. For core subjects like charms and transfiguration, 2 houses combined for classes, with 2 or 3 large lessons each week. Add in essays and extracurricular supervision, and the professors never seem to rest. This teaching system was set up long ago by the Board of Governors, the Ministry, and the school, McGonagall continued. Back then, not many young witches and wizards attended school, and the staff could cope. But as Hogwarts grew, more students enrolled, and even pure-blood families stopped homeschooling their children. The old system no longer fits. Attempts to reform have been delayed by ministry educational decrees and interference from the board. Now that the school has regained more direct management, we might be able to make changes. There was a small note of pride in her voice. "You might ask why we don't simply hire more professors," she went on. "Although we've regained authority, much of the school's funding still comes through the board. The finances don't support significantly increasing staff. Also, hiring is complex. We must screen candidates carefully to avoid bringing in harmful influences. We are exploring the possibility of financial independence. If Hogwarts secures its own income, that constraint would be removed." McGonagall explained the situation candidly. "The deans have discussed a pilot reform. We'll trial it with the 2nd and 4th years. If it proves successful, we'll extend it school-wide." She explained the choice. 1st years were too new, 3rd years had the elective system already, 5th years needed OWLs, 6th years were choosing their NEWT pathways, and 7th years were preparing for life beyond school. 2nd and 4th years were the most stable cohorts for a test. "What will the new system look like?" Hermione asked. "In content, we've added and removed some courses and clarified what is required and what is elective. The required material is based on the original syllabus, combining closely related topics and trimming redundant parts. Electives will include what was cut, plus extensions and advanced topics." The aim was to reduce professors' workload by shifting some original content into electives. Students who wanted more could take the electives and build a foundation for advanced knowledge. Those who struggled could focus on the required material without being overwhelmed. "Won't that just widen the gap between students?" Loren asked immediately. McGonagall pursed her lips, remembering a recent meeting of deans. Snape had been lurking behind a pillar, face in shadow. It's true there are already great disparities between students, sometimes larger than the gap between a wizard and a troll. Forcing too much knowledge on some students is cruel. They will forget most of it after graduation. Forcing everyone into the same standard is unfair to both the quick and the slow. Electives allow both types to thrive. She shook her head. Elective content won't be part of the standard exams. It will be self-study. Professors are not omnipotent. There are limits to what we can do. Ultimately, the acquisition of knowledge depends a great deal on you yourselves. Professors will always answer questions, but now more of the choice is yours. The office cubicle fell silent for a moment. In the empty room, only Loren's loud sips of juice broke the quiet. Professor McGonagall waited patiently as they absorbed the news. The fragmentation of the magical world was becoming more obvious. Compared with the intricacy of ancient magic, modern magic was simpler, and that simplification had produced a general decline in skill among witches and wizards. The new curriculum, electives for the gifted and solid compulsory courses for everyone else, was meant to address that. Educational reform was an experiment in the future of magic, and it had to be tried. Loren hesitated for a beat, then asked, "Professor, why did you call us here today?" McGonagall set down her cup and smiled faintly. "I want to reopen the Transfiguration Club." Transfiguration Club? Hermione's eyes widened. "I've only heard of the Charms Club." Professor McGonagall nodded. Clubs aren't Filius's invention alone. Every subject at Hogwarts once had a club, a dueling club for defense against the dark arts, a slug club for potions. In recent years, though, clubs have folded for a variety of reasons. Professors leaving, students losing interest. If the teaching reform proceeds, professors will have more free time. Several of my colleagues have already told me they'd be willing to restart extracurriculars. She looked at them with an approving glance. "I want to gather a small group of capable students to meet regularly and discuss Transfiguration. I would like to invite both of you to join the Transfiguration Club." Normally, students would apply once a club reopened and be accepted after review. McGonagall's direct invitation, before any club details had even been announced, was praise in itself. Hermione's heart quickened. She was almost ready to agree on the spot. Loren hesitated. He still had potions work to do with Professor Snape and needed time to practice alchemy. "Professor, what will the meeting times be?" he asked. McGonagall suspected he was trying to avoid extra work. She remembered his laxness during the last finals, but she eased him. 2 sessions a month. It won't take up much of your free time." Relieved, Loren accepted along with Hermione. McGonagall ran them through some recent material. Their answers pleased her. "Go rest for now. I'll notify you of meeting dates in advance." It was nearly lights out. Filch was no doubt in the staff room preparing for his rounds. Loren and Hermione stood and left, already chattering before they reached the doorway. "Why do they call the Potions Club the Slug Club?" Hermione wondered. "Maybe it's the professor's taste," Loren said. "Like Charms Club is just Charms Club. What will the Transfiguration Club be called?" "I don't know. Maybe the Kitty Club." Loren's joke died on his lips when McGonagall's face went stern. She had heard their supposed whispering and felt a small frown. Students could be so impertinent. Animagus, she thought, not a subject to make light of. Back in the common room, Ron was no longer vomiting slugs, but he still looked green and kept making retching motions as if he were forcing the memory down. Everyone kept their distance. If it weren't for that wristband, Marcus would have been flattened ages ago. Ron muttered, still furious. That mention of a protective wristband piqued Loren's curiosity. That night, he consulted the magical reference and spoke, through the book, to Nicholas Flamel. Flamel was dismissive. "Those wristbands merely solidify a shield charm," he said. "They can only stop simple curses." "Solidified shield charms?" Loren leaned in. "A full-body, always responsive protective field could be invaluable in a duel. If you could reduce sneak attacks and add one more layer of defense, that would be worth a lot." Flamel sketched a few runes in the air. Making them is straightforward, similar to constructing a small spatial box. You use runes and formations to fix a shield charm to an item, but increasing the protective strength is difficult. You must layer runes and shield charms repeatedly, 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000. If you want a truly formidable defense, you might have to stack it 100,000 times. Against something like a full-power Sectum Sempra, you'd need that kind of repetition. Against Avada Kedavra, even that might not hold. Loren clicked his tongue. 100,000 layers. Better to work on charms and dueling technique than try to refine a miracle wristband. The next morning, immediately after breakfast, Professor Snape intercepted Loren and they went to Snape's office. A handwritten parchment bearing the headmaster's seal and Dumbledore's signature lay on the desk, edged with delicate printing. Loren didn't know why Dumbledore would greenlight experiments, but he didn't suspect Snape of forging anything. "How will we research the resurrection potion?" Loren asked. Snape sat ramrod straight behind his desk, pale and hollow-eyed in that way that always suggested sleepless nights. For all that, the idea of the potion seemed to have lifted him a little from his gloom. "The Philosopher's Stone is limited and must be used with restraint," he said in a dry voice. "First, I will outline several approaches, determine the required ingredients, establish the ritual's steps, and then we will experiment. You will assist me," Snape added. "Once the materials and ritual are set, your familiarity with potions will be enough for you to be a potions master." Loren didn't share Snape's optimism. "Can the materials and ritual be found before I graduate?" he asked. Snape's eyes flashed. "From my inquiries, the materials and ritual are intended to make the Philosopher's Stone function as a substitute for death, change death from an absolute to a property we can manipulate. That's the technical hurdle. The real problem is understanding the concept of death itself. I will find a way to explore it." He said it without wariness. The resurrection potion had become a focus, a belief that made him willing to keep struggling. Loren didn't press. Snape needed that hope. Loren shifted topics. "Do you know about the teaching reform for second and fourth years?" Snape allowed a short, dry laugh. "During the curriculum discussions, I was one of the few to argue for a clear distinction between core courses and electives. McGonagall and Flitwick keep wanting to cram everything into every student's head. They don't always appreciate that some people have limited capacity." There were arguments to be made on both sides. Loren let it stand and asked another question. "Will potions have a club?" Snape nodded. "The resurrection potion is a major project. I will need students to help process ingredients and assist in experiments. They will learn extra potions knowledge in return." So, that meant lab assistants and research hands. Snape busied himself with setting up a potions club and finalizing the experiment plans. McGonagall was occupied with her club and administrative duties. The only quiet professor left was Phileas Flitwick, who taught charms and served as Ravenclaw's head. Apparition fell under charms enough to make Flitwick the natural choice for instruction, so Loren went to find him. Flitwick's office was by the 13th window on the right side of the West Tower. The idea of a second-year student practicing apparition made the small man's beard bristle in alarm. "Apparition! Do you know that in the last 50 years there have been 27 cases of splinching resulting in death? Mr. Loren Morgan, you should wait a few years before attempting this charm." It was not a sensible thing for a second year to ask, and yet Flitwick's surprise softened into interest. He'd been impressed with Loren's earlier term, exposing Pettigrew, the troll incident, the confrontation with Voldemort, and he had always harbored a grudging admiration for courage. Loren smiled. "Just call me Loren. I'm not naive about the dangers. That's why I brought essence of Murtlap." He held up the small vial. Snape had willingly supplied the potion when he learned Loren wanted to practice apparition, though he'd added an oddly dry warning about bringing one's hands to the potions office even if they were severed. Flitwick bounced on his toes. "Did McGonagall approve?" "She's tied up with the new curriculum and school duties. I came to you," Loren answered. It wasn't exactly false. The professor had been busy. "All right," Flitwick decided, punching his palm with his other hand. "But I must be sure you have mastered all theoretical aspects of apparition." For the next half hour, Flitwick put Loren through a thorough oral exam, origins of the charm, intonation, wand movement, the coordination of mind and body. When he finished, he fixed Loren with a serious, oddly admiring look. "Remember 3 points: destination, determination, deliberation. Did the Sorting Hat ever say you'd be suited to Ravenclaw?" he added lightly. They both knew the Hat's verdicts and histories. Loren didn't answer, he just smiled. "You know apparition can't be done reliably within Hogwarts grounds," Flitwick said. "We'll have to go outside." Flitwick tapped Loren's arm with his wand. He had to stand on tiptoe to reach. Loren felt a strange buoyancy, as if gravity had lost its hold. "Hold steady," Flitwick called, smiling, and with a sweep of his wand, the office window flew open. Loren felt a pulling force and then was hurled out into the air, plummeting down the tower. Sunlight warmed his face, the wind screamed in his ears, and as the ground rushed up, he trusted Flitwick implicitly, not panicked, just exhilarated. He spread his arms and laughed. Then, just before he expected to hit, the force reversed and flung him upward, skimming across the castle and over the greenhouses toward the edge of the forbidden forest. The flight pressed at his chest, then eased into a swift glide. He saw dew on grass, smelled damp earth and pine, and watched owls sunning on the greenhouse roof. They came to rest at the forest's edge some way from Hagrid's hut. Flitwick's beard had been mussed by wind. He fussed with it for a moment, obviously delighted. "That was wonderful," he said. "The open air and scenery always lift the spirits." "What charm was that?" Loren's eyes shone. "A slight modification of the levitation charm. This is extracurricular work. If you're interested, you're welcome in my charms club." Flitwick's enthusiasm spilled over. "We're expanding." "You're expanding recruitment?" Loren asked. Previously, the charms club was small and selective. Only students with good ODOLs and advanced charms classes usually got in. "There will be no formal assessments this time," Flitwick said. "If you want to take part in club activities, you're welcome. The club will act as a gentle supplement to classes, a place for students to explore elective material at their own pace. It's part of the reform." Loren felt the promise of more opportunities settle around him. Clubs, experiments, practical training. Hogwarts was changing, and he had a place in the middle of it. 167. Knowledge and Skills. On the clearing at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, Professor Flitwick waved his wand and transfigured an old wooden hoop in front of Loren. He looked at him seriously. "Don't overexert yourself. If you feel anything unusual while casting, stop the charm immediately." Loren measured the distance to the hoop. "I will." He had learned apparition from books, but real practice required his body to adapt to the strange muscle reactions of the teleportation charm. He had sought out the professor to avoid accidents. "Listen carefully for my command." Flitwick raised his voice. 3, 2, 1. Loren concentrated, twisting his body backward as he swept his wand, letting his magic fall into a void state. Every part of him felt pressure from space. His eyes felt pushed into their sockets, his eardrums bulged inward, and his chest and head seemed bound by steel bars. Bang! He vanished from his original spot, and a heartbeat later reappeared inside the wooden hoop. He checked his limbs and hands, up and down, left and right. His eyes, nose, and ears were all intact. A private thrill ran through him. He had succeeded on the first try. "You have a good target and composure," Flitwick said, "but you lack a bit of determination." The little charms professor stood back where Loren had been and held up a hair no longer than a centimeter, his face puzzled. Beginners often have trouble with aim and composure. Even some who have mastered apparition forget about determination and leave behind small things, fingernails, a strand of hair, an eyebrow. It's not as dangerous as losing a limb, but it's a bad habit. Some wizards go bald because they lose a little hair every time they apparat. Do it enough, and it's gone. Really, your casting was skilled. If I didn't know you had a solid theoretical foundation and understood the dangers of splinching, I'd think you'd practice this on your own. His voice rose a fraction. Loren touched his head but couldn't tell which hair was missing. He took the warning seriously. For the next hour, Loren kept practicing under Flitwick's watch. His wand movements grew smaller and more precise. He stopped twisting his body so much to enter the void. His body caught up with his mind, and choosing landing points became instinctive. By the end, Loren had truly mastered apparition. "What remarkable talent!" Flitwick exclaimed. To him, Loren had learned in hours what some adults never managed. Still, the professor cautioned him. "Even though you've learned it, apparition should be a last resort. You must wait until you're 17 and have a license from the Ministry of Magic before using it freely. Hogwarts will offer guidance classes." Flitwick, who had a touch of goblin blood and was a little on the short side, kept repeating the precautions. He knew the Gryffindor boy in front of him would probably not always listen, but he explained it thoroughly anyway. September had the first hush of autumn. Though most trees in the Forbidden Forest were evergreen, the beech trees at its edge already wore a few yellow leaves. A breeze came from the woods, carrying a chill that slipped between the trees. A not very sturdy branch shed its first autumn leaf. Bang! Loren's figure split the air again, a vacuum appearing where he'd been. Air rushed back with a roaring whoosh. The next instant, he reappeared in the same place, his index and middle fingers pinching a somewhat dry yellow leaf. His face showed the typical exuberance of youth as he handed the leaf to Flitwick. "Professor, I'm giving you autumn as a gift." "Are you bribing me?" the professor asked. Loren flashed a brilliant grin. Monday morning, the notice about curriculum reform for second and fourth years went up. The Gryffindor students clustered around the notice board in the common room, reading and arguing. The compulsory section focuses on knowledge required for OLs and NETs, the notice read, while non-exam content from the old curriculum is moved to electives and higher-level topics are offered for those who wish to explore further. Neville read the announcement aloud with a confused expression. "What does this mean?" "Whoopee!" Seamus cheered, bouncing and bumping into Neville. "It means we don't have to memorize 1,000 magical herbs and fungi anymore. We'll have half as much of the giant bats class." Neville laughed, though he felt a bit guilty at making fun of a professor. He pursed his lips and, cheeks flushed, added, "I still have to memorize it. I like herbology." At the Great Hall, the same conversations buzzed at every table. A Ravenclaw girl asked their prefect, Penelope Clearwater, "Will we be learning a lot less after the reform?" Penelope looked uncertain. She didn't know what all the changes would mean either. Percy Weasley, at the next table, and always keen to be useful, answered in the steady voice of a prefect. "No, the compulsory content has been reduced, but the elective section has added more. If you want to learn more, the new system will give you access to advanced topics." "Praise Professor McGonagall. The bat's torture time is halved," Lee Jordan crowed. Usually the Weasley twins would have been the loudest, but this time Fred and George fell strangely quiet, eyeing Percy and Penelope with suspicion. Huddled together, they whispered so no one else could hear. "You know what I'm thinking, right? I think they look alike too." But the Ravenclaw girl still worried. "If that's the case, why not just put the advanced content into the textbooks? Wouldn't that be better?" Cedric Diggory, standing nearby, joined in. "Because some students don't do well with theory, cutting compulsory content gives them time to focus on vocational skills and practical training." Cedric, gentle and popular, was the kind of student everyone trusted. As the likely future Hufflepuff prefect, people listened when he spoke. Penelope, who was Muggle-born, had once fretted over her future and knew the limits of choices in the magical world. Hearing Cedric's point, her eyes brightened. "Yes, after graduation, a lot of theoretical knowledge just isn't used. If that time was spent on job-related practical magic, it would help many people." The conversation opened up. Like Quidditch, if you want to be a professional, practicing is what matters. Ministry clerical work needs people who can handle paperwork and reports. Aurors should focus more on defense against the dark arts and practical charms. "My dad wants me to help in the shop after school. I won't use most of what we learn." George and Fred exchanged delighted looks. More free time meant more mischief. The argument spread fast. Compulsory classes would ensure OBUL and NET readiness. Electives would offer advanced study, and students who struggled academically would have more time to prepare for careers. The idea pleased almost everyone and reached the staff table. "The older students certainly think deeply," Professor McGonagall said with a pleased smile. "When I mentioned the reform to Loren and Hermione, they didn't see this side of it." Dumbledore, watching them, agreed with a wistful look. "After they leave Hogwarts, they'll face the world directly. Some will marry and take on family responsibilities early. The school shouldn't only teach knowledge, it must prepare them for life." He sighed. "Minerva, you are more practical than I am." A cheerful, confident voice broke in. "Vocational skills, I don't think there's a professor better suited to teach those than me." Lockhart, resplendent in a golden robe patterned with green vines, leaned forward. "Headmaster, I could start a vocational club. I think these students who are about to enter society must be very confused," he said, as though confiding in Dumbledore. "They need an experienced mentor, someone well-versed in various practical skills, to guide them." He flashed a blinding smile that showed every one of his teeth. The notion grew popular. Pick a career, practice the relevant skills, and keep only the compulsory academics. In the corridors, students excitedly planned future lives. If you wanted to be a Quidditch player, practice more. If you wanted to be an Auror, drill data and charms. If your family had a shop, enjoy yourself and learn what you need. Hermione frowned. Something about the trend felt wrong to her, though she couldn't say exactly what. She stood there in her simple robe, white shirt under a black outer robe, her small, fair face taut as she bit her lip, worry flickering across her features like an autumn breeze stirring still water. Loren had been preoccupied lately with one thought. Apparition was forbidden inside Hogwarts, and he wanted to show Hermione who was in charge. He kept thinking of ways to get her out of the castle so he could demonstrate. The trial of the reform had been running for nearly a week, and Hermione had buried herself in advanced electives, so he hadn't yet found the chance. "I want to make candy at Honeydukes," two first-year Hufflepuffs squealed as they hurried by. "Me too," the other agreed. Hermione watched them go and asked Loren, between knowledge and vocational skills, which is the right choice. Loren looked after the Hufflepuff badges on their robes and shrugged. "It depends on the person. For you, knowledge is more important. For Seamus, maybe skills matter more." "But how do they know if the career they pick is right?" "No one can guarantee a choice," Loren said, thinking it through. "But knowledge gives you more options. A student who masters all their subjects can use Defense Against the Dark Arts to become an Auror. If that doesn't suit them, they could switch to clerical work. If that still doesn't fit, potions knowledge could help them make magical candy." Hermione's eyes sparkled as she listened and nodded. "Shall we go see Hagrid this Saturday?" Loren asked casually. Okay," she said, not noticing anything odd. Late that night, on the castle's second floor, most corridor candles were out. Hanging portraits had turned to face the wall, their canvases sleeping. The castle lay quiet, shadows hiding Filch and Madame Norris on patrol and other unknown things in the dark. Dumbledore, restless and sleepless, padded down the stairs. He felt the familiar emptiness. He wanted a cup of hot cocoa. Like a student, he made his way to the kitchens. "Hail to the great Slytherin!" A soft, hoarse voice rasped, and a small figure slipped into the abandoned girls' lavatory. Dumbledore's half-closed eyes widened, and a faint smile touched his mouth. He had only learned about the Chamber of Secrets and the Basilisk a week ago, and hadn't yet had time to make a full plan. He hadn't expected a surprise this late. He continued toward the kitchens, unhurried. He had long ago learned that he did not need to control every detail. If he sorted the main threads, the rest would follow. The basilisk's gaze could kill, which was far too dangerous for students. If they could remove some of its lethal power, with a deluminator perhaps, its petrifying effect might remain, and their plan could move forward. The last, worrying detail would be the fangs. "Hot cocoa is truly a good thing," he murmured to himself as the soft sound faded into the castle night. Second-year Transfiguration had already begun following the revised syllabus. Where the old lessons had dwelt on the full theory and long, detailed principles, the new plan stripped most of that away. The goal now was to give the students a firm, practical grasp of Transfiguration, how to cast, how to stabilize a change, and how to apply it. It was like a math class that stopped proving every theorem and instead taught you how to use the formulas to solve problems. Even the example exercises stayed the same. The pool that filled and drained wouldn't somehow split into Team A and Team B, and the two people chasing each other down the road wouldn't suddenly run in circles. Professor McGonagall no longer demanded flawless, ornate results. The basic in-class transfigurations were simplified. Beetles rearranged into buttons no longer needed tiny filigree or layered coloring. They were simple, black two-hole buttons. Hermione's notebooks took far less ink. Where she used to dip down half a pinky's depth each class, the ink mark was now less than half that. Her notes were shorter, too, and she found herself with an odd surplus of time at the end of lessons. After McGonagall finished the essentials and the demonstrations, she left the remainder of the hour for practice. Hermione had succeeded once before, and this time she perfected the transformation on her first try. She tapped her vinewood wand and watched the button she'd made. A faint yellow-green sheen rimmed its edges, and a delicate relief showed on either side. Her face was a mix of satisfaction and wistfulness. For the first time, she found the class a little dull. Across the table, Harry and Ron had also made plain buttons and were flicking them like marbles, trying to knock one another's off the desk, grinning as if each tiny victory were an extraordinary feat. Childish. Beside Hermione, Loren, her desk mate, was playing with his button too, but his had been altered in a peculiar way. Its normally flat back had 3 tiny wheels, and Loren used his wand to steer the button like a little tricycle, making a low, mimed toot-toot now and then. "Childish," Hermione muttered. She flicked her wand idly and gave her button a set of wheels as well. At first, it wobbled forward a short distance, then steadied and shot across the wood like a remote-controlled toy, racing toward Loren's. The two collided with a soft clack. Loren looked up, their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, something electric passed between them. The 2 little button cars were soon locked in fierce combat. On the Slytherin side of the room, the atmosphere was quieter. Draco sat beside Goyle, trying to turn his button into a cufflink-style adornment for his robe, carefully rounding the edges. On Goyle's other side, Vincent Crabbe sneered and flicked his own button in front of Draco. "Want me to teach you how to do it?" he taunted. Crabbe's button already had the smooth surface and neat curve Draco was aiming for, complete with a Slytherin snake motif Crabbe had added, something the house-issue robes didn't have. Goyle, in the middle, was full of praise, and a few nearby students joined in. "You've been practicing, haven't you?" one said. "This could get you extra credit from McGonagall." Draco set his wand down, tried to look casual, and smiled with the others. "This style would make next year's robes stand out," he joked. He chatted about Quidditch and mocked other houses' brooms. Everything seemed normal, too normal. Last year, Crabbe and Goyle had been near the bottom of the year. Sometimes their clumsy ignorance made people wonder how they were purebloods at all. Now Crabbe's rapid improvement unnerved Draco. He caught Crabbe's eye and found something off about him. There weren't red rims or glassy pupils, but the look was cold and malicious. Crabbe's smile flashed teeth. Draco felt the hairs on his neck prickling. He forced his voice light. "Oh, did you two plan next week's Quidditch?" The nasty gleam in Crabbe's eyes dimmed, and the feeling of menace eased. Crabbe slid back into the clumsy, irritable boy Draco expected. By morning, the castle buzzed with another kind of gossip. Lucius Malfoy, Draco's father, and a member of the school board, had been stopped by Filch at the castle gates. Malfoy's family was well known and often influential. When a news item involved him, it spread like a fairy tale rumor. By the first break, the whole school had heard it. "Ha! Malfoy finally got his comeuppance," some students crowed. Harry, who disliked Malfoy, liked the idea that the governor had been held. He thought, half in jest, that Hagrid ought to have been on gate duty. Then Mr. Malfoy might have been briskly ejected. The man had helped Harry with the dragon incident, but that didn't cancel Malfoy's many slights. After Flourish and Blots, Harry's dislike had only grown. Seamus and Ron were still absorbed in button car games. After seeing Hermione and Loren's match yesterday, they'd both removed a button from their clothes and were racing them. Seamus's first button was already Ron's trophy. He made a mock bang with his mouth and then joined Harry's conversation. "Malfoy's dad showed up later. He was visiting Snape," said Rolf. "It must have been planned," Harry said. Ron stood, stretching his cramped legs. Hufflepuff were in class with Slytherin when Malfoy got pulled out. "Where are Loren and Hermione?" Ron asked. "Flitwick called them. Something about a club," Harry answered. Loren and Hermione left Professor Flitwick's office in a daze. Hermione kept blinking, incredulous. "Professor Flitwick, he actually asked us to be the new heads of the Charms Club?" "Yes." Loren watched Hermione's surprised little mouth and nodded. Hermione flushed at the praise, overwhelmed. "You turned him down?" she demanded. "Not turned down," Loren said. "I said I'd think about it." "But we should just agree. Of Raworth," Hermione protested. To her, any professor's request was an honor that should be accepted at once. Loren explained why he hesitated. "It's not only Flitwick who needs student leaders. McGonagall will want representatives for Transfiguration too, and I don't have time to run a club properly with the Resurrection Potion Project and everything." At this, Hermione brightened. While she loved Flitwick, McGonagall was the teacher she most wanted to work with. The idea of being a junior head in Transfiguration, getting to speak with McGonagall and delve into the subject, thrilled her. She began to imagine the conversations they might have and giggled softly to herself. When they reached the stairwell corner, someone was waiting. Draco stepped out and hesitated, glancing between Loren and Hermione. Hermione, who had already guessed his purpose, patted Loren's arm. "I'll wait for you in the common room," she said and hurried away. Draco visibly relaxed. He still felt awkward around Hermione and a little guilty at how he'd treated Muggleborns before. He turned to Loren. "There's something I need to talk to you about," he said. Loren's mind flicked to Lucius's visit. He nodded. "Let's find an empty classroom." Lucius Malfoy had barely slept after Draco's note the previous day. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the Dark Lord's face, the cold, serpent gaze that made Lucius feel stripped bare despite every attempt at occlumency. He suspected the Dark Lord took a perverse pleasure in fear. His servant's dread only pleased him more. But tonight was different. Voldemort kept asking, almost obsessively, "Lucius, where is my diary?" Lucius jerked awake from that image, then steadied himself in the dim light of Snape's office. Snape looked less shaken than Lucius, too composed, his eyes bright with an urgency restrained at the edges. "Did you bring the items?" Snape asked, voice slow and pressing. Lucius set a box-shaped storage charm on the table and pushed it toward Snape. "All the batch's raw materials and payment are here. I exchanged all the galleons for the ingredients you requested." He prodded the box with his wand. "What do you need so many horns of bipedal beasts and so much dittany for? Researching a new potion?" Snape sneered. "None of your business." Then, with the same slow pressure in his voice, he asked, "Mr. Malfoy, why the sudden visit?" Lucius had wanted to speak openly about the Dark Lord, about Dumbledore, about Crabbe's mess, but he couldn't be sure which side Snape truly stood on. 10 years earlier, Snape had seemed foolishly loyal in ways that had placed him near the center of the Death Eaters. Later, he had accepted Dumbledore's help, avoided the Dementors, and taken a post at Hogwarts as Potions Master and Slytherin's head. His rise and the size of his business ventures worried Lucius. He didn't know what to trust. In the end, he said only, "Pay more attention to your students. Some of them can't hold back anymore." He took out another box and, with a more personal tone, placed it on the desk. "And this is from me. Please, look after Draco." Then, Lucius left without another word. Snape sat alone behind his desk, the shadow falling across his face, expression as unreadable as ever. Draco Malfoy kept glancing at the classroom door, nervous that someone might interrupt them or overhear. His father's instructions still rang in his ears. For the first time, Draco fully understood what "doing whatever preserves the family" truly meant. After class yesterday, he hadn't gone to the Great Hall with the others. He had gone straight to the dormitory and written a long letter to Lucius detailing his encounter with Crabbe in the changing room, describing Crabbe's sudden improvement in magic and the change in his temperament. Lucius had received the letter, not slept all night, and come to Hogwarts first thing that morning to question Draco about Crabbe. Faced with the changes in Crabbe's abilities and behavior, Lucius's first thought had been that someone else, a dark wizard, was impersonating Crabbe and had infiltrated the school. But Crabbe's lingering desire for Quidditch suggested it was still Crabbe himself. Lucius therefore suspected a dark arts object was influencing him. Linking that to the Centaur's remark and Crabbe's role in hiring a werewolf during the summer's Azkaban break-in, he concluded the matter must involve Lord Voldemort. Draco at first wanted to tell Dumbledore and Snape and let them handle Voldemort. Lucius shut that down with a look Draco didn't understand and ordered him, "Don't treat Crabbe like a mere follower anymore. Give him some favors so he knows we stand for pure blood supremacy, and help Harry Potter a little, warn him about danger in the school. Beyond that, do nothing." Draco's voice trembled when he told Loren what Lucius had said. The tremor was only partly fear. It was tangled with the strange weight of his father's command. In the end, he did not warn Harry. He sat in the old classroom and told Loren everything instead. He couldn't explain precisely why. Perhaps he disliked Potter. Perhaps he didn't want Loren and his Muggle friends dragged into the affair. "Crabbe is being controlled by something strange, possibly linked to Voldemort," he finished hoarsely. "Be careful around purebloods. You and your Muggle friends both." After that, Draco stood up and left. He'd decided to put some distance between himself and Loren, and to put on a show of supporting pureblood ideas. Loren watched him go, feeling the words settle like dust in the empty room. He traced the carven lines in the wooden tabletop with a finger. The grain seemed to stir beneath his touch and weave into his thoughts. The diary came to his mind. In the original story, it had manipulated Ginny, opened the Chamber of Secrets, released the basilisk, and wrecked the school. He had seen the diary destroyed by cursed fire. He had seen Flamel remark that the fire clung to a wisp of the diary's malicious light and could only transmit a single message, so the diary could not have returned. The other Horcruxes? The ring in the Gaunt house remained sealed, Slytherin's locket was in the Black family home, and Hufflepuff's cup sat in a Gringotts vault. None of them could have come into Hogwarts to cause trouble. Eliminate the impossibilities, and the only remaining answer was Voldemort's main soul itself. After being defeated while possessing Quirrell the previous year, Voldemort must be back, Loren thought. Perhaps the last message from the diary had sent him thinking. Perhaps the diary's destruction had made him restless. Had Voldemort noticed him? What did he think of Loren? For a moment, Loren felt a foolish impulse to seek out Voldemort, to learn from him about gods, immortality, sages. He pushed the thought away. Talking to Voldemort would be like handing himself over. There was no telling when loyalties would fold. Following Dumbledore was the right path. He shook off the messy thoughts, left the abandoned classroom, and went to find Hermione. Over the next few days, Loren wanted more than once to speak to Dumbledore, but the headmaster's office was empty every time he went by. Dumbledore didn't seem to be seen in the Great Hall either. He had, in all appearances, disappeared. The second week of term brought less homework and more free time thanks to teaching reforms, and the castle came alive. Lee Jordan spread the news that clubs were being rebuilt and expanded. The Transfiguration Club in particular had once been a prolific source of contributions for today's Transfiguration. A simple idea hashed out in the club, corrected by the professor and discussed with peers, could become a well-supported article. Experience in the Transfiguration Club, or a recommendation from its professor, was highly valued by employers as proof of learning and practical skill. The Charms and Potions clubs had similar clout, so talk of reopening the clubs stirred a great deal of excitement. Before any of those announcements were official, another club appeared on the notice board and drew a crowd. Career Club, Lee read aloud in the Gryffindor common room, excitement in his voice. He skimmed the flourish of titles and went straight to the main point. The celebrated, best-selling author and adventurer, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, will hold a careers lecture this Friday to advise students about professions and give recommendation letters to outstanding listeners. The older students burned with conflicting reactions. The greenhouse incident had shown Lockhart for what he was, a man who told elaborate stories and performed on stage, yet had never demonstrated actual skill in charms. Still, his long list of titles and a recognized Order of Merlin made his recommendation letter valuable. At noon on Friday, as Loren and Hermione left the Great Hall, George and Fred Weasley corralled them and thrust them toward Lockhart's lecture. "You're only in fourth year. What do you need a careers talk for?" Loren protested. "The letter'll help us get a loan from Gringotts," the twins said in unison. "And you can help us get his recommendation." They smiled and rushed them along. If Lockhart's name could secure a loan, the twins could borrow from Gringotts to open their joke shop. They needed Hermione and Loren, two of the top students, to make the ploy credible. When Loren asked what the loan was for, the twins only exchanged a conspiratorial look and said, "Starting a business." They promised shares for anyone who helped but refused to explain further. At the lecture hall, many people were already waiting. Flitwick, for reasons of his own, had cast a temporary undetectable extension charm, and the room expanded to fit the crowd comfortably. Lockhart swaggered to the front, his voice amplified by a sonorous, either his knowledge of the charm or a helping hand from Flitwick. "Ladies and gentlemen, promising students of Hogwarts, welcome to the first lecture of my new club," Lockhart announced. He rattled off his accolades: internationally renowned, best-selling author, recipient of the Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts League, and a 5-time winner of Wizard Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award, and then named a string of his books: Break with a Banshee, Gadding with Ghouls, Holidays with Hags, Travels with Trolls, Voyages with Vampires, Wandering with Werewolves, A Year with the Yeti, mere fragments of his many adventures. The students below exchanged looks. Whatever the topic, Lockhart steered everything back to himself. He would extol his exploits and claim mastery of the essential skills of every profession. The younger ones shifted, ready to leave, but Lockhart soon promised to talk about careers and eased into a subject that perked ears, the position of dragon researcher. To raise dragons, the most important charm is the eye-gouging charm, he proclaimed. I once, in the Romanian Isles, instantly subdued 3 Hungarian horntails with the eye-gouging charm. Percy curled his lip at the claim. Charlie Weasley, who worked with dragons in Romania, would sooner be bitten than use a charm that harmed them, George muttered under his breath. Fred, practical even while amused, still listened. A recommendation letter was worth hearing out. Lockhart rambled on for half an hour with imprecise anecdotes of aurors he'd helped, Quidditch captains he'd advised, and creative ways he'd supposedly influenced dangerous situations. The students received few useful details about actual professions. Eventually, he quieted and asked if anyone had questions. The room hummed. No one wanted to stand up first. Then a hand rose in a corner. Lockhart brightened at the familiar face and called on him. Professor, I'd like to know about the profession of memory charmer at the Ministry of Magic, Loren asked, speaking slowly. 170. Who is the liar? Memory charmer? A murmur ran through the students. Some had never heard of the position before. A few, like Percy, whose family worked at the ministry, understood it immediately. He leaned over and quietly explained to Penelope and the others, it's the job that enforces the statute of secrecy, erasing Muggles' memories. Penelope's mouth opened in surprise. Erasing memories? That's fascinating. When Hermione heard the words, erasing memories, she understood the implication at once. Loren had already mastered 2 of the 3 memory-related disciplines, legilimency and occlumency, so only one remained, the memory charm. Harry and Ron straightened up and listened. The memory charmer was the one called in when Muggles saw them flying the enchanted car. Ron whispered, puzzled, why isn't Professor Lockhart answering? On the stage, Gilderoy Lockhart paused for a moment. He suspected Loren might be trying to expose him, testing him with a question only a perceptive student would ask. He looked down at the crowd. Loren's eyebrows were slightly furrowed, his eager student expression on full display. Lockhart chided himself inwardly. Arriving at Hogwarts had made him more nervous and paranoid than usual. Now he found himself suspicious of students, too. He laughed quietly at his own insecurity. After all, his methods for taking credit for other people's exploits were flawless. His readers had never caught him out. What could a lowly student possibly know? Still, if the question wasn't an expose, then it was genuine curiosity, and that suited him well. Lockhart brightened and threw himself into it. Oh, the memory charmer. No one understands that position better than I do. I once led 6 memory charmers, he announced grandly. In a single night, we cleared the memories of tens of thousands of Muggles. He put his hand forward for emphasis. No one, he added, half bending his fingers, understands memory charming better than I do. He beamed his perfected smile at the densest part of the audience. Loren, confronted with Lockhart's display, fell silent, as did the other students. There was something undeniably attractive about Lockhart's smile, but his whole performance felt awkward. Loren had planned to win the professor's favor gradually, and once more comfortable, asked to learn the memory charm at a less abrupt moment. Now the Career Club lecture had handed him the opening. Loren picked up the thread and asked in that innocent, eager student voice, Professor, is the memory charmer's job busy? Is there a lot of work? It's fairly leisurely, Lockhart replied. Most of the time it's clerical, filing, reports. They only clear memories during certain events or when there's a breach of the statute of secrecy. He gave another practiced smile. It can be rather dull. That answer caught the student's tough attention more than his earlier boasting. Practical details, how busy a job was, what the day-to-day looked like, were what they cared about. The older students who had been drifting off straightened up to listen. Lockhart was in high spirits. After a few mishaps earlier in the term that had dented his reputation among the students, this was his chance to shine again, this time as an educator. Loren's questions fit neatly into the small slice of Lockhart's limited knowledge where he could speak confidently, and it felt good to answer a student properly. He'd thought about the memory charm before. As satisfying as it sounded, the job's stability and paperwork were dull. Lockhart craved attention, not desk work. The post suited neither his temperament nor his ambitions. When it comes to charms, Loren continued, what do memory charmers need to know? Is there a qualification exam? Lockhart's eyes brightened. The memory charm, he declared. The main spell is Obliviate, used to erase specific memories. He paced the stage, luxuriating in the attention. You need an intimate understanding of a person's mind and soul. One mistake, and you can do permanent damage. Professor, do you know this charm? Can you teach me? Loren asked. Lockhart's boastful mask flickered, then softened into a more measured reserve. The smile at the corner of his mouth betrayed him. It's a very difficult, very dangerous charm, he said, giving the impression of gravitas. But I am indeed very good at it. If you truly want to learn, join my club. We can discuss teaching methods privately. No problem, Professor. Loren beamed like a student basking in praise. Hermione watched Loren's practiced smile and Lockhart's radiant one. Despite knowing Lockhart was a fraud, she felt inexplicably sorry for him in that moment. It was hard to tell which pretense she pitied more. Still, Lockhart's warning about possible brain damage made her hope he would remain well. Other students followed Loren's lead and raised their hands. Though Lockhart's adventures were fabricated, his social experience and contacts were real. He could offer practical advice and anecdotes that were useful for students planning futures beyond Hogwarts. Questions ranged from unusual careers, like a honeydews taster, to internship opportunities at the ministry. Percy listened especially closely to the latter. By the time the lecture ended, Lockhart left to warm applause and lively chatter. The first Career Club lecture sparked conversation across the school. Students spent part of their weekend discussing it, especially the older ones nearing graduation who were suddenly thinking seriously about careers. The second half of the lecture, the Q&A and Lockhart's real-life social anecdotes, had been the most valuable. That attention pleased the professor even more than applause. The Career Club had served another purpose for him beyond self-promotion. It was a way to delay starting a club centered on defense against the dark arts. Club activities were different from classroom teaching. In a club, he couldn't get away with storytelling and performative assignments. He would have to demonstrate real skill. He could see that he might initially attract students with showmanship, but popularity would fade fast. And worse, it might draw Dumbledore's scrutiny. The buzz from this lecture gave him a convenient reason to postpone. Lockhart walked out of the Great Hall after breakfast, greeting students along the way who peppered him with questions about various professions. At the Gryffindor table, Ron swallowed his sandwich and grumbled, "Call him a liar, but he does seem to know some things, or say he's not." Neville and Seamus frowned. Harry drank a glass of hot milk, wiped his mouth, and said cheerfully, "Who cares if he's a liar? We've survived another week, and I think Professor McGonagall's forgotten about the Homping Willow and the flying car." Ron laughed too. Across the table, George and Fred watched Loren finish his mushroom soup and dutifully handed him a napkin. Speaking with mock solemnity, they told him, "We're counting on you for our recommendation letter." "George and Fred will remember you forever," added Fred. Loren gave them a pained look. Their confidence didn't feel like a good sign. He waved a hand helplessly. "We'll see. I can't promise. If there's no recommendation, I can always lend you money." Lockhart returned to his office wearing that same perfect smile. He hung his carefully chosen top hat on a peg, then rubbed his cheekbones and sighed happily. The lecture had made him feel like a true professor again. "I must make a note of this for my next book," he mused. He glanced at the pile of unread fan mail and manuscripts on his desk. The sequel to Wandering with the Werewolf isn't finished. The signing tour for The Wizard in Me left thousands of letters, and I still have material for the professor's column. It was a pleasing kind of trouble, the trouble of fame. A knock came at the door. "Professor, it's me, Loren Morgan," came a voice. Lockhart brightened and called, "Oh, yes! Come in!" Loren stepped in and took in the office. More than a dozen portraits of Lockhart on the walls, the largest full length by the bookshelf, the smallest a half-portrait near the door. In every painting he wore some ornate robe or hat, the Order of Merlin displayed, and that same dazzling smile. "Good morning, Professor," Loren said politely. "Ah, Loren, good morning," Lockhart greeted, putting a hand on Loren's shoulder and guiding him to a chair by the desk. "I know you want to learn the memory charm and think being a memory charmer would suit you, but you're young. You shouldn't limit your options." He indicated the stack of envelopes tied with string. "I have readers from all over. You could help me reply to fan mail. Learn about other people's lives that way. Broaden your horizons and decide for yourself." His voice was gentle and his smile warm, but Loren felt his scalp prickle. If he helped Lockhart reply to all those letters, he might be tied up for hours. He had arranged to meet Hermione and Hagrid later and had astronomy Monday evenings and potions experiments with Snape on Friday. His schedule was tight. He tried to work out how to refuse Lockhart's offer without jeopardizing the chance to learn the memory charm. "I could ask Harry to help reply to the letters with you," Loren suggested quietly, hoping to shift the task away from himself. Lockhart's eyes lit up. The idea of two celebrities signing letters together was irresistible. Good for sales, good for publicity, and good for his own reputation. He began to calculate, muttering about Harry's pending punishments and how meaningful this alternative would be compared to manual labor. The plan seemed perfect. Harry would hardly have reason to refuse. "Loren," Lockhart said, pushing the thought back into a polished phrase, "when you're young, you should set a goal and work toward it. I believe you'll make the right choice for your future career." He patted Loren's shoulder encouragingly. "Come to my office every Wednesday evening from now on. As a professor, I must help students chase their dreams." "Go on now. We'll see each other in class." Before Loren could press the point about a recommendation letter for George and Fred, Lockhart steered him politely toward the door and out into the corridor. Loren left the office, still apologizing silently to Harry. He had hoped to discuss exact teaching times for Obliviate. He had astronomy on Monday evenings and Snape's experiments on Friday nights, so other evenings would work, but the chance slipped away. 171. Harry is my close roommate, brother in life and death. The first floor of the castle, the Great Hall. Hermione was absorbed in a thick, weighty book, her Transfiguration notebook open beside her. From time to time she would look up, then copy long lines of notes onto the page. Compared with the simplified, abridged, compulsory texts, the elective material was deeper, and some of the concepts and definitions were difficult to parse. Transfiguration is any change to a target's form, including advanced transfiguration, cross-species transfiguration, and human transfiguration. The summoning charm is not so much about bringing as it is about constructing magical connections to objects. The vanishing spell disperses an object. It does not transport it somewhere else. Hermione read the textbook aloud, then reread the passages silently until she was satisfied she had them memorized. Finally, she wrote down the remaining questions and confusions in her notebook. The downside of electives was that Professor McGonagall did not always teach them in class. Hermione had to teach herself, research answers, or collect questions to ask the professor later. But she preferred a different method: study with someone. Through the gaps in her hair, you could see pale skin and the delicate line of her nose, but what was most arresting were her eyes, focused, serious, reflecting the beige pages of the book like little sparks. The Great Hall itself was wide and quiet. Students drifted in and out for breakfast, enjoying the weekend, some skipping stones on the Black Lake, some wandering in small groups, but Hermione's world was the book. Loren came into the hall and immediately found her in the corner. Because it was the weekend, the little witch's hair was unkempt, fluffing out about her head. The disarray gave her an unexpectedly soft look. Loren's steps lightened instinctively. He moved behind her chair, peered at the questions in her notebook, and read them aloud in a low voice. Are the vanishing spell and the summoning charm opposites? He considered for a moment. Not exactly opposites. Wizards still argue about how to define the vanishing spell and the summoning charm. Just pick the definition that makes most sense to you. Hermione wrote a note, then asked, Can the vanishing spell be used on people? No. The vanishing spell works on non-magical objects only. They discussed naturally back and forth. Annotations filled the margins. Hermione's doubts diminished. The book's knowledge sank in. This was her way of learning. After she crossed off the last question about the intonation used for transformation spells, Hermione packed the book, an inkwell, and a quill into the small linen pouch at her waist. She sighed and complained, "You and I were studying together all summer, and now your progress is faster than mine." There was no real jealousy. Learning made her happy, but the feeling of being left behind was irritating. Hermione puffed out her pale chin and clenched her fists. "And the memory charm. Remember to teach me when you learn it." "All right, I will." Loren stretched out and playfully pushed her shoulders. "Come on. If we're any later, I'm worried Hagrid won't have anything to show for his efforts this year." "You're nearly 2 weeks late, and you're still in a hurry?" When someone was at fault, he changed the subject. "By the way, where are Ron and Harry?" "They went to the Quidditch pitch to practice," Hermione said without looking up. They walked toward Hagrid's hut. It was already autumn. Some plants that wouldn't survive the cold had begun to fade from lush green into sickly yellow. Squirrels darted along branches, clutching winter stores and hiding them in secret hollows. A squirrel shoved a nut into a hole, and a gnome popped out and grumbled, "I haven't seen Professor Dumbledore in days. I wonder what he's doing." Loren thought Dumbledore must be dealing with the basilisk problem, though he was unsure of Voldemort's state or what the diary had revealed. "Maybe he's just busy," Hermione said, watching a squirrel and a gnome scuffle. The squirrel's tail bristled as its tiny paws flailed. It was already shoving the gnome off the branch. Hermione watched the two fighting animals, her eyes bright. Loren looked at her and felt the crisp early autumn air lift something heavy from his chest, carrying off the last of the summer heat. The outer leaves of the humping willow had already yellowed. Unlike most trees, it put out new shoots in spring and shed them in autumn, leaving it bare and snowy in winter. This year, Harry and Ron had helped replace a few of its branches. From a distance, a large swath looked oddly bare. Hagrid's door was shut. Loren and Hermione knocked tentatively. Fang did not bark. "Knock, knock. Coming, coming!" Hagrid's warm, slightly breathless voice called from inside. After a clatter of chairs and dishes, the door swung open. "Hey, Loren. Hey, Hermione. Good morning." Hagrid stood awkwardly in the doorway, his huge frame slightly hunched, as if reluctant to let them in. Loren and Hermione exchanged a look and glanced toward the hut's interior. "You aren't raising something dangerous again, are you?" Loren asked. "Let them in," a familiar voice said. It was Dumbledore. They slipped inside. Dumbledore stood before a small table, handling a spider with long, delicate legs, a body covered in black fur and many little eyes. Fang crouched nearby, watching the small acromantula warily. This one was far smaller and calmer than the adult acromantula they had seen before. Even when Dumbledore waved a silver, lighter-shaped object near its eyes, the spider only moved its chelicerae casually. "Loren, Hermione, good morning. Forgive my rudeness, but it's a delicate moment. I can't leave," Dumbledore said lightly. Hermione looked from Dumbledore to Hagrid with a puzzled expression. So Hagrid was raising a young acromantula at the headmaster's request. A host of questions flashed through her mind. How did school rules apply? How many points would be docked? Loren, meanwhile, recognized the device in Dumbledore's hand. It looked like a deluminator. He'd read how the deluminator could collect and store light and release it again. He handed a bottled potion to Hagrid and edged closer to watch. He guessed the experiment had something to do with vision. Dumbledore was testing the acromantula's eyes. Hermione stayed a respectful distance back. She wasn't afraid of the spider, but arthropods made most girls a little queasy. She still had questions about Dumbledore's behavior. Was the headmaster breaking school rules? From what house would points be deducted? In the deluminator's glow, a bright white light mixed with silver and candle-like yellow seemed to tug at the faint, mottled strands of dark magic inside the spider's eyes. Dumbledore worked deliberately, as if disentangling those chaotic strands, isolating one kind of magic from another. Loren watched the progress, then ventured into gossip. "Malfoy told me Crabbe's been acting strange. I think," Dumbledore interrupted gently, turning to Hermione with the same mild expression he always wore. I think Hagrid needs someone with strong potions knowledge to help adjust the insect repellent to the right concentration. Miss Granger, could you help? Hermione realized at once that this was a pleasant way of sending her away. It was impossible to refuse the headmaster. Dumbledore's manner was courteous, his tone so kindly that no one could object. Slightly dazed, Hermione obliged and followed Hagrid out to prepare the potion. Loren found Dumbledore's approach odd. Hermione and Hagrid were trustworthy. This wasn't something that needed hiding. "Why not tell Hagrid and Hermione everything?" he asked before they left. "Hagrid has been keeper of keys and grounds for decades," Dumbledore said without pausing, his attention on the spider. "He is loyal and steadfast. If I had to entrust my life to anyone, I would trust Hagrid without hesitation. I trust Miss Granger in the same way." He continued to tease at the strands of magic. Loren hesitated. But just now, the little acromantula grew impatient. Its chelicerae chirred and it thrashed. Dumbledore casually fed it a rock cake smeared with treacle tart. The spider squeaked, poking at the cake with its chelicerae and legs, but failing to bite through it. It finally curled into a trembling ball, distracted, allowing Dumbledore to continue his work. "Trust does not mean revealing everything," Dumbledore said quietly. "Sometimes a little mystery helps a plan proceed more smoothly and leads events to a better outcome." Loren stared at him. Today's headmaster struck him as unusually hard-hearted. "Malfoy told me Crabbe's magic and temperament have changed. I think he's being controlled by Lord Voldemort, like Quirrell was last term. Shouldn't we get Voldemort out of the school?" Dumbledore seemed unsurprised. "For a long time, I thought extremism and hatred came only from harsh circumstances. But as years pass and more students arrive and leave Hogwarts, I've learned that personal choice matters too." He spoke as if seeing many faces. Students who had made an impression and then gone. Bill and Charlie Weasley, Newt Scamander, and Leta Lestrange, and with a shadow, Tom Riddle. "If Crabbe could see that he is trapped by obsession, we could help him break free. If he is unwilling to wake, there is nothing we can do." Loren wasn't eager to save Crabbe either. "And what about Voldemort?" "Just as Quirrell last year, in that diminished state, he does not dare act recklessly within the school. He can only use small tricks to stir trouble. Such a state can sometimes do good." Dumbledore's voice carried a small laugh. Loren wondered what good Lord Voldemort could possibly do. Dumbledore went on, as if trying to make Loren understand, "He and Harry are bound by those threads of magic. One day Harry will have to face Voldemort himself and settle the matter of that night 11 years ago. Harry must grow, especially in mind. The mind is the source of power." It sounded as if the headmaster was planning to put Harry in a position to confront Voldemort. Loren thought of Harry and silently hoped he would be all right. He now understood why Dumbledore had usurped the right to keep Hermione and Hagrid uninformed. Harry would turn to them for help, and keeping them in the dark would prevent leaks. "So you kept Hermione and Hagrid in the dark to stop them from telling Harry," Loren said. Dumbledore did not answer directly. He went on sorting the magic strands from the spider's eye. Loren gave a short, uneasy laugh. "Aren't you worried I'll blab?" "For some time," Dumbledore said. "Harry will be under pressure he has never known. I need your cooperation. Help me understand how Harry is coping." He winked. "Think of it as a pact between us." Loren's expression hardened. "What are you saying? Harry and I are close roommates, brothers in life and death. You want me to spy on him?" Dumbledore stopped smiling and looked at Loren earnestly. He seemed surprised by how fiercely young people valued their friendships now. "You'll have more to pay for that friendship," he said. He coughed twice, a sudden, awkward fit that made the deluminator in his hand wobble. 172. Wrong. I will dare to do it again. As Dumbledore stabilized the magical connection between the deluminator and the acromantula's eyes, his ragged breathing slowly eased. The thought of extra payment still made him want to laugh out loud, but he suppressed it. "So, Mr. Morgan, shrewd businessman, how much do you think is fair?" he asked. "Give what you think is right," Loren said readily. "The headmaster of Hogwarts probably doesn't earn as much as you'd assume." Dumbledore paused, then turned the deluminator over in his hand. "May I offer this as payment?" "It's only a little thing I made to pass the time," Loren smiled, "but the mithril casing should be worth something. Maybe not enough for full compensation, but for the sake of our friendship, why not? Dumbledore returned the smile. Since you put it that way, I'll accept. Dumbledore waved Loren closer. Let me show you briefly. The Deluminator collects and stores light from its surroundings and can release it when needed. It works on Muggle electric lights, lanterns, and the like. Do you know what light really means? He asked. Loren glanced at the small lamp at the top of the Deluminator. Many meanings came to mind. Hope, the sun, energy, but the more he considered it, the less certain he felt. A deep purple shadow pulsed when he looked too long. He shut his eyes. What does it mean? He asked simply. Dumbledore answered softly. Light means direction. When you're in darkness, when you're lost, light shows the path ahead and tells you which way to go. My intent in designing this was to preserve hope when there is light and to illuminate the path when darkness and confusion come. Loren nodded, half understanding. Are you adding new functions to it now? Dumbledore pointed to the acromantula's 8 eyes. Many animals, owls, snakes, appear to have glowing eyes at night, but that isn't true light. Their eyes are built to concentrate ambient light we cannot see and reflect it. Magical creatures are different. Their eyes genuinely glow from the magic within them, and that light can have strange effects. He listed quietly. An acromantula's stare can terrify its prey. A Kneasel's gaze can detect those who are deceitful, and a basilisk's gaze. He left the thought hanging. Loren stopped listening to the lecture and focused on the thin magical threads flowing from the acromantula's eyes. Most were dark gray, mottled, and chaotic. The Deluminator was sorting them, grouping the darkest black strands. Are those black threads the magic of fear and deterrence? He asked. I believe so. Dumbledore manipulated the Deluminator, and the black and gray threads slowly separated. When the last black filaments pooled into the device, he closed its lid and produced a white mouse from his sleeve, setting it before the acromantula. The mouse squeaked, and realizing the spider couldn't reach it, bolted away. Dumbledore flipped the Deluminator's switch. All 8 of the acromantula's eyes fixed on the mouse. It gave a terrified squeak, collapsed, and lay motionless. It seems to have worked, Dumbledore said with a satisfied smile. Loren understood then. The black threads represented the acromantula's deterrent. When the threads were contained, the mouse was safe. When released, the fear magic immobilized it. He had expected something to do with vision or blindness, so the effect puzzled him. What practical use does this have? He asked. Dumbledore didn't answer directly. He slipped the Deluminator back into his sleeve, pushed the struggling acromantula away from the mouse, and smiled. That was Fawkes's snack. If I don't return it, Fawkes will burn off my eyebrows. After pocketing the mouse, he turned to Loren. Wait for me in the girls' lavatory on the 2nd floor after dinner. You'll understand then. Basilisk! Loren exclaimed, the realization dawning on him. Dumbledore only smiled and drifted off to take leave of Hagrid and Hermione. Noon, Hagrid's hut. Hagrid picked out pumpkins barely larger than Fang, but with rock-hard skins, chopped them into pieces, and stewed them in a cauldron of clear water. Nothing else added. Watch now, these pumpkins. Aye, they're the sweetest, Hagrid said, beaming. After serving rock cakes as a main course, no one had bothered eating at his hut. Harry and Ron always showed up after meals or left early, which rankled him. This time, he was determined to prove there were good things in the forest. Pumpkins, once ripe and caramelized, were hard to ruin. Even raw, they smelled sweet. The scent of stewing pumpkin drifted out to the forest edge, and the air smelled of sugar and autumn. Even Hermione, usually with a small appetite, ate an entire stewed pumpkin until her belly was round. Hagrid finally drained the cauldron. Loren and Hermione sat on small stools outside and helped scrape out pumpkin pulp and seeds, spreading the pulp on a board to dry. The seeds, some saved for next year's planting, could be roasted for winter snacks. When Hagrid cut open another pumpkin, a slimy nest of slugs squirmed inside. He flew into a rage, huffed, and flung the pumpkin and its slug family so far they disappeared. It must be that Weasley boy, he grumbled. Last time I showed them my patch, he spat slugs into it. That little thief, Hagrid muttered. I'll plant him in the pumpkin patch next time I see him. Loren and Hermione exchanged a look and laughed. Hermione teased, Oh, Hagrid, forget planting him. When Ron and Harry come, you'll probably have to bring out your biggest, sweetest pumpkins to keep them happy. Hagrid bristled, but without conviction. No way. He ruined my pumpkins. I said I'll plant him, and I will. What about Harry? Will you offer him pumpkin? Loren asked. Hagrid turned his back. Harry didn't harm my pumpkins. Both Loren and Hermione burst out laughing. By the time the sun lowered toward the western clouds, turning the sky a pumpkin gold, most of the seeds were processed. Hermione went to the sink to wash her sticky hands. The pumpkin pulp had dried into small crusts on the back of her hands that washed away with a splash. Loren lingered and came up behind her to wash his right hand. Though she'd had the day off from lessons, Hermione felt content. The air smelled of pumpkin and the light was beautiful. But one thing was nagging at her. She rubbed her wet hands on Loren and complained, "You're so secretive. This morning you even sent me away when you were talking." Loren protested. "It was Headmaster Dumbledore who sent you away. What has that got to do with me?" "I don't care. Your fault anyway," she said, rubbing her hands a few more times to dry them. Loren grumbled then, mischief in his eyes, leaned close and whispered, "Do you know why I really came out today?" "No. Why?" "I learned apparition," Loren shouted excitedly, then quickly smeared pumpkin juice, his left hand was covered in it, across Hermione's cheek. The sweet scent of pumpkin on her face stunned Hermione. She froze for a heartbeat, then let out a high, outraged scream. "Loren Morgan!" Hagrid and Fang both turned their heads. "You're done for!" Hermione grabbed at him. "Apparition!" With a loud pop, Loren vanished from where he stood and reappeared not far behind her, grinning. "See? That's apparition." Having missed him, Hermione threw caution and decorum aside. Her only thought was to teach him a lesson. She wiped the pumpkin juice from her face and set off after him. Loren didn't stand still. He darted toward the castle and apparated again and again to keep his distance. Hagrid watched the pair racing down the path at sunset and sighed, "That's the beauty of youth." Hermione felt her speed increasing with each thought of a new hold or takedown. The fantasy of a hook, a whip kick, a rear naked choke powered her legs. She felt lighter, faster, her stamina suddenly better than ever. The distance between them closed quickly. She imagined pinning him and making him apologize. Just as she reached out, Loren popped away with another apparition. He turned and flashed a grin. "Want to learn? I'll teach you." Hermione's temper flared. She gave chase, faster than before. The twilight breeze was cool, the scent of grass and trees sharp in her lungs, the boy's shadow long and stretching across the lawn. They ran like that, one chasing, one darting and reappearing, until they reached the hall, lit with blazing torches. "Apparition," Loren tried again, but this time he couldn't teleport away. Oh no, he had forgotten. Apparition was forbidden within Hogwarts. Hermione seized the moment. One arm went around his neck, and the other held him in a controlled chokehold. She didn't squeeze with deadly force, but she held firm, a triumphant smile on her face. She had imagined hanging him up and teaching him a lesson for 3 days and nights, but now that she had him, her priorities shifted. She wanted a confession and an apology. She panted into his ear. "Tell me, how many times has it been? You always tease me and never learn." Loren still had his wand and could have used a jinx, knockback, binding, stupefy, but this wasn't a duel to the death. He hadn't hurt her. Besides, he had started it by smearing pumpkin juice on her face. Loren did not struggle. He accepted being caught. Struggling would only make his neck more sore. He stayed still, like a kitten whose scruff had been grasped. Hermione shook her head. "Well, say you were wrong. Will you stop teasing me?" "Wrong, and I'll still dare to in the future," Loren replied very honestly. Hermione was equal parts amused and exasperated. "What did you say?" he repeated. "Wrong, and I'll still dare to in the future." It was impossible to expect a promise from him to stop. Hermione tightened her hold for a moment, then loosened it as she recovered her breath. Loren also took the chance to breathe. After a while, he muttered quietly, "If you don't let go, I'm going to shout." Hermione was caught off guard, then smiled in spite of herself. She stretched her neck, still stiff, and said slowly, "It'll be more embarrassing for you if people see, won't it?" "I'm not afraid of embarrassment," Loren said, spreading his hands. "But you are." Hermione was momentarily speechless. He was right. For a heartbeat, she had no way to deal with this rascal, and doing nothing felt unbearable. She pinched his cheek hard and twisted it. "If you tease me again, your face will swell up." That was Hermione's fiercest threat. Loren just smiled, pressed her hand down gently, and tugged her toward the great hall. The rich smell of dinner was already drifting out. Tonight, the Hogwarts kitchens had made pumpkin, too. "Did you hear me?" "Stop smiling," Hermione snapped. "I heard you." 173. Weeping Myrtle. The girls' lavatory on the second-floor corridor of the castle. At Hogwarts, people rarely called it that. They called it Myrtle's lavatory. Loren had barely stepped inside when the squat, pale ghost girl shoved half her body out of a cubicle door and the other half back in. Her long, straight hair hid her cheeks, and big, round glasses masked her eyes. A permanently melancholy air clung to her. It was hard to imagine what she might look like smiling. "I'm not a pervert," she blurted as he hesitated. "I'm waiting for someone, and this lavatory is empty, all right?" Loren had arranged to meet Dumbledore here tonight and had arrived early. Myrtle had latched on to him. "You're right, I live here. Who would want to see me?" Her voice crumpled. She began to sob. "Even when I was alive, no one cared about me. Why so sad now?" Loren thought, helpless. He'd heard Myrtle was difficult, but not like this. As her crying swelled, the toilet began to flush on its own. Water gushed and then, rather than draining, started to overflow. A shallow river escaped from under the cubicle door and spread across the flagstones. The sounds of helpless sobbing and the rising water made Loren frown. He stepped carefully across the remaining dry floor and pushed the cubicle door open. Moss had taken root in the cracks of the old cistern, and clear water kept spilling out. Myrtle crouched in the corner, eyes huge, as if she wanted to scream at him. "I heard you haunt the flushing toilet," Loren said. He didn't know what Ghost's ideal living conditions were, but this certainly wasn't one. Myrtle seemed suddenly comforted by the attention. She didn't rant like she did with other students. She choked out, "Yes, Myrtle lives here. Myrtle has nowhere to go. Ghosts and wizards dislike Myrtle, so Myrtle has to hide in the flushing toilet." Loren rubbed his temples. "Why don't you get someone to fix it?" She grew more aggrieved. This lavatory was already abandoned. Some of the younger witches said I splashed around and made a fuss, so they left it to me. Filch told Myrtle to sort it out herself. The lavatory hadn't been used in decades. It wasn't likely to be a blockage of rotten debris. Loren guessed there might be an air pocket trapped in the bend of the pipe. He waved his wand and set to work. A careful transfiguration shifted the trapped air and redirected the water. A charm eased the moss from the cistern. The pipe sighed and then roared as the trapped air rushed out and the water finally ran cleanly into the drains. He repaired a loose clasp in the tank with a small transfiguration as well, and with a final charm, he pulled the moss free and sent it spinning down the drain. "Okay, that should stop it overflowing." He sheathed his wand. The water had stopped. The floor was no longer flooding, though Loren still felt uneasy until he had washed his hands. Myrtle, her eyes behind thick lenses sparkling, darted about in a way that was almost giddy. She flitted between the cistern and the bowl, exclaiming, "It's fixed! It's fixed! It won't be wet here anymore." She fussed for a while and then floated over to where Loren was rinsing his hands. "What's your name?" she asked, grateful. "Loren Morgan." He shook the drops from his fingers and looked at her. Ghosts were like this, trapped souls shaped by whatever had been left unfinished in life. They couldn't feel warmth or cold, couldn't truly touch solid things, couldn't taste food. Their small pleasures were odd and diminished. Many were driven a little mad by the long years of that half-existence. Professor Binns, who taught history of magic, was the particular example. His lectures had become endless repetitions of whatever he had done in life. Nearly Headless Nick, the Grey Lady, the Bloody Baron, and Myrtle were mostly coherent, but when they weren't, they could be very far gone. "Myrtle Warren," she said, dizzy with happiness. "I'll remember you, Loren Morgan. I will." "Can you tell me about yourself?" Loren asked gently, careful not to prod at old wounds. How did you die?" Myrtle's face lit up in a strange, proud way. For her, being asked about it was a kind of attention she had been starved of. "Oh yes, it was dreadful," she said, as if relishing the telling. "I remember it perfectly. I died in this lavatory. Olive Hornby mocked my glasses, said I looked like a four-eyed dog." Her story itself was simple, and in many ways, banal. Myrtle Warren had been a muggle-born witch of Ravenclaw, mocked for her thick spectacles and pimples. One day in 1943, hiding in the lavatory to cry, she was attacked and killed by something she never fully saw, only the enormous yellow eyes before it took her. Even when I was alive, no one cared, she whispered, trying to make the memory larger, more dramatic. It took them a very long time to find my body. She brightened as she told the next part. Olive Hornby walked in and said, "Are you sulking in here again, Myrtle?" Professor Dippet told Olive to go look for me. Her voice grew sharp. That's when she found my body. Oh, she'll never forget that scene. Never, not even before she died herself. Loren listened. Myrtle, unsatisfied in death, had hunted after Olive Hornby, following her. Olive had appealed to the ministry to restrain Myrtle's behavior, and afterward Myrtle remained at Hogwarts, most often in this lavatory. Occasionally, when someone flushed with a startled scream, Myrtle would be sent sweeping into the Great Lake. Over time, the lavatory fell into disuse, and the fewer people who came, the more it became Myrtle's. As she spoke, long dormant memories unsealed, and emotion flooded her voice. How can the ministry control a dead person? She wondered. How can they control a ghost? Why did no one care about me when I was alive? Why didn't someone stop Olive Hornby? Why didn't someone stop that monster in the lavatory? Her questions tumbled out, urgent and unanswerable. She ignored Loren and drifted back to the cubicle, curling up in the rim of the toilet as if it were a bed. Loren opened his mouth but found no words. Why indeed? Why had fate been so cruel to a girl whose life had been so short and who had been granted nothing of grace in return? 174. Weird snake illustration. I should have discovered the toilet was broken sooner. Myrtle wouldn't have had to live in such a damp place for so long, a gentle, aged voice said nearby. Loren glanced at Dumbledore. Headmaster, when did you get here? When you fixed the toilet, Dumbledore replied with a small smile aimed at both Myrtle and Loren. He stroked Loren's hair as if trying to smooth away some tiny, unnoticed annoyance. Hogwarts will always keep a place for her until a young wizard like you helps her come to terms with death. Reserve a toilet. Reserve a lavatory, right? Loren rolled his eyes and flicked away the large hand on his head. And don't give me any strange tasks. I can't do them. Dumbledore chuckled. It's not a task. It's a beautiful vision. Let's get down to business. Neither of us speaks Parseltongue. We might not even be able to enter the Chamber of Secrets. Loren didn't want to argue. Saying too much might be a trap. He turned to examine the row of brass faucets on the wash basin. Relax. Someone kindly showed me the way last week. Dumbledore waved his wand, and a small, brightly colored snake formed in the standing water, wriggling up from the sink to catch their attention. It almost sounded as if Lord Voldemort had personally guided Dumbledore through the chamber and revealed all the passwords and secrets. Loren silently mourned Voldemort for 3 seconds. The little snake slithered up the edge of the basin and coiled around a brass faucet. On the side of the pipe, a snake-like pattern was carved. With most of its tail hanging on the faucet, the conjured snake raised its head and hissed at the carved pattern. The faucet flared with dazzling white light and began to spin. The small snake coiled around it, dissolved into flowing water, and fell back into the sink, merging with the pool. The entire wash basin slid away, revealing a very thick pipe beneath, wide enough for a person to crawl through. I suppose I haven't reached the point of senility yet. Though I don't understand Parseltongue, I can still reproduce the sounds, Dumbledore said triumphantly. Loren peered into the pipe. The stench of sewage hit him, dirty, black, bottomless. In the lavatory light, he could see wet slime near the entrance. He took a step back and held out his hand. Headmaster, you're more experienced. Please go first. Dumbledore smiled and shook his head, tapping Loren's robes lightly with his wand. Loren felt a soft force lift him, as if the levitation charm had been improved. Let us begin our adventure, Dumbledore said, almost childlike, and pulled Loren into the pipe. They slid through the underground channels like a roller coaster. Left turns, right turns, sudden drops and rises. There was no sense of distance or time, just the forward slide through the thick conduit. Many thinner branches forked off in every direction, but only the main pipe was large enough for a person, so there was little danger of going the wrong way. After a long, winding ride, they shot out of the pipe with a whoosh, hovering briefly before settling to the ground. Loren guessed they were now beneath the Black Lake. Watch your step. Dumbledore opened the deluminator, and 3 or 4 glowing orbs drifted out. Finding no torches or candelabras to land on, they floated in the tunnel instead. They stood in a circular stone tunnel whose floor was littered with small animal bones, piled ash, and irregular fragments where bones had weathered. Water seeped into the bone dust, building mounds that in places rose taller than a person. The passage was as silent as a graveyard. The skeletons felt like graves. Loren said nothing. Dumbledore's face grew serious as he took Loren's hand and led him on, stepping carefully over one mound of bones after another. Around a corner, they saw a colossal object at the entrance, a 20-foot-long basilisk skin. It had been shed long ago, but hadn't withered. It still gleamed a vivid emerald green. The diamond-shaped scales were sharply defined. Just looking at it conveyed a sense of smooth, hard armor rather than flimsy skin. "Headmaster, how should we divide it? Half and half?" Loren pressed his hand against it. It was thick and tough, more like an outer shell than mere hide. Dumbledore studied the skin, estimating its age and the basilisk's original size. He chuckled at Loren's matter-of-factness. "Loren, do you mean, Headmaster, you want 60%? That's not impossible. You are the headmaster. Have you considered this might be a legacy left by the founder Slytherin to Hogwarts?" Loren frowned thoughtfully. "You have a point. So as headmaster, you get 70%, and as a student, I get 30. His expression was one of mock anguish, as if the decision was a grave burden. No less, truly. No less. Dumbledore couldn't help ruffling his hair before tugging him onward. "We'll talk about dividing the skin later, at least after the school year's over." They continued through winding turns until they reached the end of the circular tunnel. A solid stone wall sealed it, split down the middle like double doors. Carved on the surface were 2 lifelike snakes with scales so precise they seemed real. Their lower bodies were intertwined, spiraling and locked together. The snakes' necks arched. Their eyes, 4 large emeralds, glowed eerily and reflected into Loren's blue eyes. In his vision, the stone texture peeled away and the scales took on a matte, living sheen. The tails untangled and swung back, the necks arched, poised to strike. Hiss! One snake lunged forward, opening its mouth to bite the other's head, as if to swallow it whole. Light burst from the emerald eyes, and along the seam of the door, the 2 snakes formed an image terrifyingly familiar to Loren, the illustration on the first 7 pages of the Book of Abraham. A snake devouring another snake, the door seam matching the staff in the picture. The scene before him was identical to the illustration. When Loren came to his senses, the 2 stone snakes still sat where they had always been, eyes locked and tails coiled together. The scene of one snake devouring the other that he had just seen was gone, as if it had been an illusion. Emerald light still gleamed faintly from their carved eyes. Loren ran his fingers along the rough scales and fangs, stone, unchanged, and yet somehow different. Questions crowded his mind. Why would an image from the Book of Abraham appear here, in Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets? Which came first, the founding of the chamber or the writing of that book? Had Slytherin read Abraham's text, or had Abraham seen these ruins, or had 2 distant wizards simply recorded the same thing independently? No one could answer him. Because the Book of Abraham was involved, he couldn't ask Dumbledore directly, so he kept his questions to himself. Dumbledore stood looking at the chamber's door with an expression Loren couldn't read, then unexpectedly sighed. He gathered a few bones from the floor and transfigured them into a snow-white python with translucent scales. The snake coiled before the door, raised itself to face the 2 stone serpents, and let out a series of long, low hisses in parcel tongue that sounded like a single command. "Open." At the command, the carved snake's eyes flickered. They unwrapped their entwined tails and slid apart, using the central seam as a boundary. The stone wall split down the middle, revealing a passage beyond. They stepped through. A long gallery extended into darkness, flanked by rows of stone pillars carved with coiled serpents. Several floating orbs drifted in and settled atop the candelabras, snake heads spitting pearls, though the light they provided was faint compared to the cavernous room, leaving much of the chamber in shadow. Occasionally, a misty green glow washed the ceiling, revealing more of the chamber's bleak grandeur, dark gray stone, an atmosphere of age, a hush of antiquity. "Loren, Do you know the story of the Chamber of Secrets? Dumbledore asked, his voice unusually resonant in the enclosed space. I've heard bits, Loren said. Allow this old headmaster to tell you. Dumbledore led him deeper. We don't know the exact date, but it was likely over 1,000 years ago. The four greatest wizards, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin, built this castle to shelter young witches and wizards and teach them how to protect themselves. For a time, the founders were united. They sought out children with magical talent, taught them, and the school flourished as they had intended. But differences grew. Slytherin believed that magical education should be reserved for pure-blood families. He would not accept Muggle-born students. He distrusted them. He and Gryffindor argued fiercely, and Slytherin left. Dumbledore paused, and his voice tightened. The old wounds of the wizard-Muggle conflicts had shaped much of his life. He had seen the worst of fanaticism and blood-chasing. He had watched how such beliefs could destroy lives. Even so, he did not hate Muggles or Muggle-borns. But he knew people who would use such ideas to justify cruelty. Legend has it, he continued, that Slytherin secretly sealed a chamber within the castle. Only his true heir could open it, release whatever terrible thing lay within, and purify the school, by his account, eliminating those unworthy of learning magic. Loren considered that. It doesn't sound like an instruction to kill Muggle-borns, and surely such a huge construction couldn't have been hidden from the other founders, especially not from someone like Ravenclaw. What do you think? Dumbledore smiled wryly. Smart people have blind spots, too. They often believe themselves the cleverest in the room. Loren grinned. Who do you think is smarter, Slytherin or Ravenclaw? The headmaster pretended to think it over and then said lightly, Rowena Ravenclaw, in my opinion. Why? I've no particular proof. It's just what I believe. Can I borrow Ravenclaw's sapphire, then? Let me experience her cleverness. Not now, Dumbledore said. You're no fun. They walked on, passing pillar after pillar. At the far end, behind the last pair of columns, a colossal stone statue dominated the wall, nearly the height of some of the castle towers. It depicted a gaunt, ancient wizard with a simian face, a disdainful look, and an arrogant bearing. His thin beard nearly reached the hem of his sculpted robe. As they looked, both Loren and Dumbledore thought the name Salazar Slytherin. Slytherin was a man of foresight and mystery, Dumbledore said softly. I cannot fathom why he clung so tightly to his belief in blood purity. He looked at the statue with a steady light in his eyes. I do not believe he left the chamber and the basilisk so that centuries later they could be used to kill Hogwarts students. I will not allow that to happen. Dumbledore lifted his wand and a gentle breeze stirred the dusty air. The light orbs trembled. Centuries of dust lifted and drifted away. From the air itself, a translucent giant python took shape before the statue, an enormous shimmering serpent that flicked its tongue and breathed a long Parseltongue invocation. Speak to me, Slytherin, the greatest of Hogwarts' founders. Loren couldn't help but marvel at the transfiguration. Usually transfiguration changed one material into another, water into wine, beetle into button. Here Dumbledore had shaped nothing into something. Air made flesh. The statue's carved mouth opened wider and wider, revealing a vast black void and two opposing lower fangs. A verdant magical glow pulsed inside the mouth. Slow, powerful breaths exhaled from that void. Dumbledore tapped Loren with his wand, and the boy felt himself lifted as if by invisible hands. They floated up, weightless, and were carried into the statue's mouth. Dumbledore guided them down to land in the space left by the coiled snake's stone body, just enough room for them at the edge of something enormous. They were in front of a living basilisk. Even with Dumbledore right beside him, Loren's breath caught. The creature was almost 50 meters long, thicker than his body was wide. Its massive trunk and tail formed an outer ring around the lizard-like head in the center. Dark green scales shone with a metallic luster. The tail scales looked like they could shatter stone and gold. A great exhalation came from the basilisk's nostrils. The stench hit them, foul, oppressive. Loren swayed. Is the basilisk's breath poisonous? I feel like I'm being poisoned, he muttered, pinching his nose. The venom isn't in its breath, Dumbledore said calmly. He touched his wand to Loren's head, and with a soft pop, a transparent bubble formed around him, shielding him from the fetid air. The first basilisk was bred by the most despicable of wizards. It is a Class A dangerous creature, largely untamable. Its gaze can kill anyone who looks into it. Dumbledore extended his wand and from a distance gently pried open a slit in one of the basilisk's eyelids. Beneath the lid, Loren glimpsed a chilling yellow pupil and a burst of ghastly green magic that flooded the slit with a death-bright glow. The air around the eye thrummed with hostile power, a pure, life-negating force. Before that death magic could reach them, Dumbledore produced the Deluminator and flicked it open. The leaking magic was inexplicably drawn toward the device, held by the runic array etched on its casing. Loren stared, fascinated by the complex runes, beyond his current alchemical understanding, but clearly intricate in design. Dumbledore crouched and held the Deluminator between thumb and forefinger so Loren could see. "This is a sliding switch," he explained. "I copied the casing from Muggle lighters and flashlights. Open the lid and then direct the Deluminator at the light or magic you want to collect." Loren nodded, humbled and excited. Dumbledore shook the Deluminator with a practiced rhythm. The green magic drew in and began to separate into 3 threads, shimmering dark green, the yellow linked to the pupil itself, and a dusty gray. The green threads represented the lethal gaze. The gray threads produced petrification, that awful stone stillness that could only be undone with a mandrake potion. The yellow thread carried the gaze between the others. Dumbledore guided the Deluminator to siphon off the green threads. In 2 or 3 seconds, the death magic was gone, condensed into a ghastly green ball of light inside the device. He snapped the Deluminator shut. The gray and yellow threads withdrew back through the eye slit. The basilisk's eye closed. "You try the other eye," Dumbledore said, handing the Deluminator to Loren with an encouraging look. Loren felt a flush of pride and a little embarrassment. This was an advanced instrument, and he couldn't resist turning it over in his hands. Dumbledore advised him calmly, "You won't control the gaze immediately. Open the Deluminator first, then open the basilisk's eye. If the threads don't separate cleanly, keep shaking. You'll find the right frequency by feel. Absorb only the green threads, then close the eyelid and the Deluminator." Loren followed instructions, concentrating as the magic pulsed and tremored. At first, the threads would not separate neatly. With patience, he found the rhythm, and the colors began to layer. He managed to draw the green death threads into the Deluminator. He felt proud. He would grade his own performance in 82, and relieved when the device clicked shut. Dumbledore smiled. "Then the Deluminator is yours. From now on, I will entrust you with collecting the basilisk's gaze every month." Loren blinked. "What? This is a basilisk," he whispered at last, awe and a little fear in his voice. 176, Spell Club. "The basilisk is a living creature," Dumbledore said. "Its magic will regenerate. In about a month, it will be capable of threatening the students again." He bent and stroked Loren's forehead, eyes narrowing into slits as a curious smile creased his face. "You will be given the Deluminator as your reward, and the responsibility of protecting the school will rest with you." Loren rolled his eyes. "Can I refuse? As headmaster of Hogwarts, I must set an example and keep my word," Dumbledore replied. Loren frowned. "But the basilisk will wake again soon. How am I supposed to test the eyesight of a 1,000-year-old basilisk when it wakes? Should I feed it first?" They both knew Voldemort's previous visit to the Chamber of Secrets had only been an inspection. He had not awakened the basilisk then. Ever since the chamber was reopened, it was certain that when Voldemort returned, he would command the basilisk to wreak havoc. A reawakened basilisk would not be tame like it had been. Dumbledore pretended to think it over. "You have a point," he said with a roguish glint, "but I believe you'll find a way." Loren wanted to curse. The old headmaster with the white beard smiled like a fox. He had realized last year that Loren was more mature than Harry and didn't respond well to slow, step-by-step teaching. It was better to present a plan and let Loren take the initiative. Giving Loren the Deluminator involved alchemical considerations Dumbledore could not fully explain yet. Nicholas's no comment wasn't really silence, so much as a sign that Loren wasn't ready to understand. The two of them restored the chamber to its original state and walked back the way they had come. "Headmaster, how do you plan to use the basilisk and Voldemort to test Harry?" Loren asked. "Harry can speak Parseltongue," Dumbledore said. He'll be the first to notice the basilisk, and the rest will naturally follow. Harry's miserable, Loren muttered. He is destined to walk a thorny path. His struggle will come from the world and from within. He must trust himself, trust his friends, and persevere. That sounds even worse, Loren said. Sunday morning in the Great Hall. Hermione, raised by a dentist, had been taught early on about proper diet and dental care. Before Hogwarts, she ate carefully, chewing slowly and sensibly. Spending time with Loren had changed that. Cola might be bad for teeth, but it tasted good. Delicious food might leave you bloated, but it made you happy. Hermione couldn't say when it began, but she'd started to enjoy food the way Loren did, without worrying too much about the consequences. She had to admit he sometimes behaved terribly, but he made things that were unbelievably good. Now Loren had cut bacon into small pieces, forked them into steaming oatmeal, added spoonfuls of stewed beans, and stirred. The bean gravy dyed the porridge an inviting color, and the aroma of bacon and beans rose in the steam. Loren leaned on the table, not eating the food he'd prepared, but stirring it in circles with a spoon so its scent filled the air. Hermione felt her mouth water, and the muscles under her tongue ache. She wanted to eat. She had tried to replicate Loren's cooking, but never matched the taste. Maybe making delicious food like magic required talent. She sat down beside him and wiggled her nose. Loren glanced at her, then sighed theatrically. "What's the matter?" "Nothing." "Did I hit you too hard yesterday?" he asked. "No, I was just greedy for a moment and fell into Dumbledore's trap." Loren handed the bowl of porridge to Hermione. "You eat it. I don't like savory porridge." "Oh." Hermione brightened when she heard Dumbledore's name. Whatever the headmaster was up to made her feel safe. She took a spoonful. Meat, bean paste, and oatmeal combined in a savory burst. She covered her mouth and asked, "It's so good. How can you not like savory porridge?" Seeing her delight cheered Loren. He stopped brooding about the basilisk. He tried to look solemn and said, "Savory porridge is heresy. Sweet porridge is superior." Hermione humored him, humming twice, then returned to devouring her bowl. Across the table, Harry and Ron were whispering about training. Learning that Slytherin had switched to the latest models of flying broomsticks had galvanized every Gryffindor Quidditch player. From Wood to Angelina, even Fred and George, everyone intensified practice. Ron, excited, jabbed a finger into the air. "Malfoy only got onto the team because of connections. He won't stop you. Catch the snitch before they widen the score, and we'll win." He slammed the table with excitement. "You should fly circles right over Marcus's head." Harry considered the idea. He'd once made Malfoy tumble in their first flying class, and though he didn't say it out loud, he believed he could beat Malfoy. "I've got a year more training than him, so I can catch the snitch first," Harry said. "But the trouble is finding it fast." Professor McGonagall's voice cut through them. "Potter, Weasley." She approached with a severe look. "You two have detention tonight. This is for damaging the Humping Willow." Harry and Ron's shoulders dropped. They had hoped the matter would be forgotten. Ron was assigned to help Filch polish every silver trophy by hand in the trophy room. Harry was to help Professor Lockhart answer letters. Ron's scalp tingled at the thought. Polishing a whole room full of trophies without magic would leave his hands numb. Harry felt even worse. "Professor," Ron pleaded, "could it be next week? The Quidditch team has new tactics to practice today." McGonagall hesitated. Gryffindor hadn't won the cup for years, and she'd been mocked by Snape more than once. Even though Gryffindor had taken the House Cup last year, she felt a little defensive in front of Snape. Seeing hope in Ron's plea, she relented a little. "Very well. Your detention will be next Saturday evening. There will be no more delays." That week, Hogwarts buzzed as professors reorganized their clubs, recruitment, admission criteria, dividing activities by year, choosing leaders. Re-establishing the subject clubs kept the staff dizzy with logistics. The Charms Club had an early advantage. Professor Flitwick had kept a senior division going. Now only a junior division needed to be added. Notices went up on the house notice boards. Professor Flitwick would hold his first public charms event on Wednesday afternoon, and every younger student was welcome. That afternoon, second years had History of Magic with Professor Binns. When the bell rang, the classroom emptied in moments. Seamus and Dean and a horde of younger students sprinted down the corridor to the clubroom as if shoes were optional. "Run faster! I heard all first and second years will be there," Seamus shouted, nearly losing his shoes. Loren wondered whether he was rushing to join the club or just caught up in the crowd's excitement. He wanted a taste of that energy and charged after them. Even older students had to dodge through the press. The feeling of being part of that surge was exhilarating. Just as he moved to follow, Hermione grabbed his sleeve. Loren turned, smiling. "Don't you want to go to Charms? Come on, run with us. Don't worry, you'll get a front row." Hermione shook her head and whispered, "I've got seats saved for us." Padma saved them. Padma Patil, Parvati's twin, and a Ravenclaw had been chosen. Flitwick had found a capable second year. Loren clicked his tongue in regret. He'd wanted to sprint. They walked into the familiar classroom Lockhart had used before. The stage still dominated the center, and the younger students sat in a ring around it. The seats Padma had saved were exactly where they wanted them, front row. Even with Flitwick's expanded Charms layout, the view from the front was much better. "Thanks, Padma. Otherwise we'd have been at the back," Hermione said, squeezing her hand. Padma laughed. "You don't owe me. Professor Flitwick told me this spot's supposed to be yours." She winked at Loren with a charming smile, deflating some of Hermione's gratitude. Nearby, other Ravenclaws muttered about house politics. "Did you hear? Marietta Edgecombe's upset with Padma. She thinks the leadership should have gone to her." "Because she's Mrs. Edgecombe's daughter. Ministry connections," another said. Loren and Hermione sat attentive, pretending not to overhear. A familiar voice beside them made them turn. "You're here too," they said in unison. Harry and Ron, Seamus and Dean, Neville, they'd all run and snagged front row seats. "We ran fast," Ron crowed. Seamus and Dean chattered about what Flitwick might demonstrate. "He was a dueling master when he was younger," Dean said. "I want to learn Bombarda." "Me too." As more first and second years filled the room, a few professors drifted in to observe. Unlike Lockhart's flashy nonsense, the Charms Club was serious and respected. At the appointed hour, the classroom lights went out. A ripple of surprised murmurs ran through the younger students. Then, milky white orbs of light rose from the stage, drifting and settling beneath the ceiling until the whole room glowed again. "It's the illumination charm," Seamus whispered in awe. A typical illumination charm produced a single orb at a wand tip. These lights floated independently, showing Flitwick's extraordinary skill. Then, a large stone embedded in the stage leapt up. It bounced across the platform with heavy thuds. The younger students gasped. "The stone's dancing!" Dean cried. "It's like one of our exam questions." The stone stopped, twisted into a pretzel shape, stretched, and pulled its flat top up into a tall, oddly shaped stool. "Transfiguration?" Seamus guessed, puzzled. Hermione cut him off. "It's charms. Charms add properties so an object behaves differently. Transfiguration changes what an object is." A commotion at the back announced Professor Flitwick's entrance. He rose into the air, floating gracefully to the newly formed stone stool. Standing steady, he beamed at the students and the professors gathered around. His voice chimed clear and resonant as a bell. "My dear students, and my esteemed colleagues of Hogwarts," he called, "welcome to the first public event of the Charms Club. Phileas Flitwick, thanks you all for coming." 177. Soul and Magic. Professor Flitwick fumbled and sat on the stone stool. His small, imperfectly built frame stood in sharp contrast to the huge, twisted slab beneath him. An odd hush fell over the students. They found themselves instinctively quiet. Because of his goblin heritage, his voice was slightly high, but after he boosted it with a loud voice charm, it reached every corner of the classroom. His mastery of charms let his words hang in each student's ear, clear and present, never harsh. "Today we are not going to debate definitions from dusty grammar books, nor list every variant of charm recorded in tomes," he began. "The origin of charms is lost to us, but every witch and wizard knows their purpose, to change or add particular attributes to an object or creature. Charms deal with what something does, not what it is, making pineapples dance, turning a stone into a stool, making things float, starting a fire." He linked familiar first-year spells to everyday uses. Levitation charm, Alohomora, the mending charm, the fire-making charm, giving practical, easy-to-picture examples. The abstract textbook definitions in the students' minds resolved into concrete images. The first years still looked a little bewildered, but second and third years clustered in twos and threes, comparing notes. Hermione's eyes shone. She leaned toward Loren and murmured so only he could hear. I used to think I understood charms, that I could always tell transfiguration from charms. But listening to Professor, I realize I learned only the book definition, not how it works in practice. Me too, Loren breathed back, leaning in. Once you grasp the essence, you see a lot of spells can be made better by little changes when you cast them. He leaned closer and blew lightly in Hermione's ear. She flinched and smacked his thigh. Listen to the professor, she hissed. Around them, Seamus and Dean were debating. Harry and Ron were comparing impressions. Neville looked half-comprehending, bewildered by talk of essences, but the examples had helped him pick up a little. Questions came with the insights, and Neville, braver than he might have been for most professors, raised his hand. Professor, how should we properly learn charms? Flitwick regarded him with gentle eyes. Ah, an excellent question. Very well put. Properly learning charms. Neville's face flushed as Flitwick glanced over the room. In a standard class, I'd tell you about their invention, their evolution, and their uses. Then I would go over the pronunciation of the incantations, the wand movements, and the critical points for each casting, and demonstrate them with you. But today I want to speak of something deeper, something you may not yet grasp, and which may not give you instant results. It will, however, serve you over a lifetime. The students sat straighter. Hermione and the Ravenclaws reached for quills and notebooks. Flitwick waited a breath, then continued. I believe every charm has, at its heart, a model. The words and gestures you learn are only superficial, visible signs of that model. More essential are the way magic operates and how you mobilize your mind, or more accurately, your soul. He paused, letting the idea sink in. Neither the operation of magic nor the soul's disposition are fixed. A wizard's magic and soul change with age. Between different witches and wizards, they vary even more. The same charm cast by two people can look and feel markedly different because their magic operating systems differ, and their souls are unique. Dean leaned into his friends and chuckled. Looks like Professor Flitwick's talking about Seamus. Whatever the spell, Seamus does it his own way. Ron grinned. Yeah, Seamus's soul is basically a firework. The comment carried a bit too loudly. Nearby heads turned and laughter slipped out. Seamus scowled. You two, after the practice I'll blow you up with my next spell. Flitwick barely noticed the disruption and went on. I don't think magic and soul are separate things. They share the same body and are linked in ways we cannot easily see. The soul influences how magic flows, and magic, in turn, shapes the soul. That is how the dark arts work, he added, the tone in the room shifting. A few soft gasps escaped. Dark arts always drew attention. Harry felt his scar twinge, and his mind flitted to a book he'd glimpsed in the restricted section, Advanced Dark Arts, though he couldn't say why the thought came now. Some dark arts require the caster to summon negative emotions, anger, hatred, a desire to harm. Those feelings change the magic, which is why the dark arts are hard to control and often have harsh consequences, Flitwick said, his voice grave. And prolonged practice of such magic can twist a dark wizard's soul into something isolated and bitter. Loren listened intently. He had dabbled in darker spells himself. He reflected that his own favorite, Sectum Sempra, seemed not to demand hateful emotion. It didn't leave him unsettled afterwards. Perhaps that made it a lower-tier dark spell, he thought, silently disliking the half-blood prince credited with it. At the edge of the classroom, Severus Snape, watching, suddenly felt an itch in his nose and sneezed softly. Professor Sprout, who had been nearby, shuffled aside a step and looked up at his dark face, her expression oddly anxious. Professor Snape, are you catching a cold? Autumn is here. Do take care. I have some herbs that help. I'll bring them by later. Snape's face remained stern. No thank you, he said curtly. Flitwick, noticing the young audience, quickly steered away from the darker subject. Some of you may also have noticed that pleasant emotions make casting easier. After a good night's sleep, you feel calm and everything flows more smoothly. Charms are effortless. Emotions belong to the soul, and the soul affects magic. Who influences whom is not always clear, but we must remember, soul and magic are at the core. Seeing students lost in thought, he smiled. I've gone a little far afield. We'll discuss more of this when some of you take my advanced charms class after your OWLs. For now, back to how to properly learn charms. The basics are still what I mentioned, the words and the wand work, but you must cast away the idea that there is one perfect pronunciation or one perfect movement for everyone. Textbooks give you a correct, reliable way to perform a charm, but not the optimal one for your own magic. The room erupted. Students who revered textbooks found the claim almost blasphemous, yet it came from a professor, and their hearts beat faster as they whispered it to their neighbors. Hermione, a staunch believer in books, felt her feelings tangle. She looked at the words she had written, mediocre correctness, and watched Loren, thinking about how he'd practiced and gradually adapted his pronouncements and movements into something wholly his own. It dawned on her that Loren had not merely trained, he had tuned the spell to suit him. She nodded, seeing the principle behind his knack for correction. Think about it, Flitwick said, spreading his hands. You each have a unique soul and unique magic. How could one rigid standard suit everyone? He raised a finger. Do not, however, start randomly altering spells. Wizard Baruffio and the unfortunate buffalo incident at St. Mungo's warn us against hasty experiments. A Ravenclaw student asked the question everyone wanted answered. Then how do we find the standards that suit us best? What you must do is practice, Flitwick replied. Repeat, again and again. Control the accuracy of your charms, the speed of your casting, and the intensity of your magic. Through repetition, you will discover the method that fits you. A collective groan went up. They had wanted dramatic, powerful spells. They'd imagined dramatic duels or dazzling new charms, not monotonous practice. Flitwick smiled indulgently. When I was young, I practiced the Lumos charm hundreds, thousands of times a day. Look, he gestured to the ceiling. A milky white globe of light hovered there, gentle and steady, its soft glow filling the room. It floated without a wand, and a dozen similar globes shimmered into being. They were plain, but their steadiness and number hinted at the result of patient repetition. Then Flitwick waved his wand. The lights rose and danced like fireflies. One streaked across the room, leaving a luminous trail. Several darted and spun, weaving patterns of light as if performing a choreographed ballet. The simple spheres drew beautiful arcs and beams, turning the classroom into a small theater of light. So beautiful, Neville whispered, completely enraptured. He'd come with Seamus and Dean, eager to learn flashy charms to impress his classmates and earn his grandmother's pride. It was hard to say whether his motivations were selfish or noble, but as he watched the lights, he felt a gentle hush descend on him, a peace he hadn't expected to find in a lesson about practice. Phileas Flitwick watched the performance as if remembering his own youth. He had spent years conscious of his small stature and the way people looked at him. He had chased power and competed in duels to prove himself. Over time, he learned that outward power was only part of strength. Inner steadiness mattered more. He had come back to Hogwarts in the 1970s and found contentment here. His power had grown from that tranquility. For the Charms Club's first public demonstration, he had many spectacular tricks he could have chosen, but he selected the Lumos charm. The gentle, pure white lights were his offering, a wish for inner calm and steadiness for every student. Around the room, the professors watched, heads tilted back. Even Snape's eyes, deep and guarded, softened as the quiet beauty steadied his ruffled thoughts. The classroom was utterly silent as the lights completed their dance and dissolved into glittering sparks. The junior division of the Charms Club will meet to help you master the accuracy, speed, and intensity of your casting. Everyone is welcome to join, Flitwick said, bowing with his usual grace. The stone stool slowly resumed its original shape as he stepped down and left the podium to the right. Silence broke into thunderous applause. 178, Iron Armor Curse. Nearly half the school had attended Professor Flitwick's lecture, and when it ended, everyone filed out at once, bottlenecking the corridor. The hallway outside the classroom was packed. Seeing the crowd that showed no sign of thinning, Loren and Hermione decided to wait. They leaned against the wall, watching students drift by and hashing over what they'd just learned. Hermione hugged her notebook to her chest and said, a little annoyed, That's why I pick up charms quickly, but my wand work always feels mediocre. She shook off the frustration, and her eyes brightened. What Professor Flitwick said made me realize I should explore my own casting method instead of following the books to the letter. Hundreds, even thousands of repetitions are needed to find a method that suits you, Loren warned. It's too time-consuming to do that for every charm. Pick a few and focus. I will, Hermione said, chin tilted, her face alight. Other students who had attended the lecture seemed to have drawn the same conclusion. Choose one or two charms. Practice them relentlessly, repeat them until you find the best way to cast them, and then show off properly to everyone. In the Gryffindor common room, a group of older students who had missed the lecture clustered around Dean as he relayed what he'd heard. Percy listened with interest and then sighed. If I'd heard that in my second year, I'd have spent every spare moment practicing charms. Can't you start now? Dean asked, puzzled. Percy chuckled and put away his essay for History of Magic, the significant impact of goblin rebellions on the basic monetary system, which he'd only finished that afternoon. The 10-inch essay even had a 5-inch appendix. If one wanted to get into the ministry and climb the ranks, he believed in accumulating as many NEEDTs as possible. Once you're in the upper years, you'll see there's more to be done than charms, he said smugly. George laughed. And studying how prefects gain power. Fred added, and dating girls. Percy's face clouded. He reached out to admonish his two impudent younger brothers. The twins squealed and darted away. Loren and Hermione climbed into the common room and found students clustered in 3s and 5s, debating which charms to concentrate on. Illumination charm. I want my light orb to perform a whole musical. Professor Flitwick's demonstration was gorgeous, a first-year witch gushed. Me too, the girl beside her agreed. Ron and Neville were counting charms on their fingers, trying to decide. Nearby, Harry and Seamus were leisurely playing wizard's chess, clearly relaxed. Advance, Seamus said, pointing, and the White Queen stepped from her throne, lifted the chair like a battering ram, and smashed the Black Knight's horse. Hermione flinched, momentarily startled, looking endearingly dazed. Loren sat down beside them. Have you picked which charms you'll focus on? Do I need to choose? Seamus replied with righteous certainty, and when they all looked impressed, he nodded. I've got it planned already. Next time I'll ask Professor Flitwick about the Expulso curse. There's no charm better suited to me. Loren and Hermione laughed. Harry, what about you? Hermione asked. I chose Expelliarmus, Harry said, embarrassed. No special reason. It just feels right and goes smoothly for me. The twins, having escaped Percy's chase, returned and overheard the conversation. They collapsed into chairs, giggling. That's perfect for Seamus, Fred said, and he and George immediately began coaching him, turning his supposed advantage into a tense stalemate. After a few meddling suggestions, Harry found himself inexplicably in the lead. Seamus scowled, slapped their hands away, and reclaimed control. Over the next few days, students eagerly argued the merits of various charms and imagined what mastery would feel like. Professor Flitwick had ignited a craze for practicing charms. The corners of the common room, abandoned classrooms, and the banks of the Black Lake all shimmered with small spells. On the advice of an older student, Hermione chose the shield charm as her focus. It lacked dazzling light or flashy power, but it offered a complete sense of security. Loren, too, tuned his practice toward the shield charm. Not because he wanted to find the perfect casting method this time, but because his own peculiar no-shortcut streak had already guided him elsewhere. He hoped that through long practice, the shield charm might undergo some kind of sublimation, the way Portoberto had evolved into the piercing spell. In the dueling practice room, Flamel this time played the part of a cool, elegant, pure-blood dark wizard. Every movement bearing noble upbringing, his smile polite but utterly devoid of warmth. With a slight curl of his lips, he pointed his wand at Loren's right and cast Bat Bogey Hex. A dangerous writhing light shot toward Loren. Protego, Loren replied, bouncing the hex away and shifting left. The two traded blows. Spells flashed and ricocheted, striking the walls. Stupefy, Flamel called. Protego, Loren deflected. Bat Bogey Hex, Protego. Casting and deflecting repeated itself. Flamel, still committed to his role, grew increasingly annoyed. During summer dueling practice, he'd warned Loren that an obsession with deflection was a bad habit. Loren had improved, but now that habit had crept back. To correct it, Flamel abandoned his polite, aristocratic rhythm and switched to an aggressive suppression, forcing Loren to commit errors. If Loren kept deflecting, overwhelming waves of attacks would eventually force a mistake. The consequence this time wasn't a mere knockback jinx or binding spell, it was the Bat Bogey Hex. Bat Bogey Hex, Bat Bogey Hex, Bat Bogey Hex. Flamel launched 3 hexes in a triangle. Protego, Loren shifted and avoided 2, deflecting the third with a shield charm. Seeing the trio going wide, Flamel apparated into the hex's path, then conjured another Bat Bogey Hex. Loren repeated the maneuver, using apparition to intercept and casting a second shield charm. He blocked all 3 hexes in succession. Flamel's face went dark with fury, and the disguise around him dissolved in a spill of light, revealing his true appearance. He pointed at Loren. "Do you have some weird fetish?" he snapped. "An attack you could have dodged with 1 apparition, and you insist on catching it with a shield charm. Do you think you're invincible?" he continued. "In a real fight, how many chances will you have to catch an opponent's spell? If the Bat Bogey Hex had been Avada Kedavra." Loren dropped his gaze and accepted the scolding. He knew he'd been reckless in training. He deserved it. Only after Flamel had finished venting did Loren explain, calmly and in detail, why he'd been training the shield charm so obsessively. He wanted to elevate the shield charm, to push it to a new level through practice and combat experience. Flamel's brows twitched as he listened. He thought, with a headache, of hands trying to force a charm's evolution through talent alone. Who did Loren think he was, Merlin? Then he remembered Loren's earlier success, that rare, once-in-a-few-centuries talent. He sighed. "Have I ever told you that creation and invention of charms should come after you're familiar with the charm's principles, and then you deduce from that toward what you want?" Flamel asked. Loren lowered his head and said nothing. He understood and wouldn't give up until he'd hit a wall. "Even if you want to rely on talent to deduce a new effect," Flamel went on, "if you don't even have a clear direction, how can the charm evolve? Remember the way you unintentionally created the piercing spell? It happened because you knew Portoberto's nature and had long expected explosive effects. When you tried to break through that troll's defense, the long accumulation of expectation triggered a change, combining explosive and piercing qualities. For the shield charm to be elevated, you must have a concrete expectation of what you want it to do. Loren, do you have that expectation, like you did for explosions?" The question lit something in Loren's mind and cleared his confusion. It wasn't only Portoberto. Loren had practiced many charms, especially the Patronus charm that Hermione had him repeat thousands of times over the summer. But none of them had evolved the way Portoberto had, because he had never held a strong, guiding expectation for them. He now felt a thread of inspiration. To make it real, though, he'd have to put this idea aside for the moment. Something else more immediate demanded his attention. The school term had begun on September 1st. It was now the 3rd week, and an ordinary yet important day was approaching, someone's birthday. Choosing a birthday gift is easy for a casual friend. A book, a pen, or a Honeyduke's gift box will do. For a close friend, a gift has to be thoughtful. Too simple feels perfunctory. Too ordinary is unsatisfying. You want something meaningful. On a Friday evening, Loren found the twins hunched in a corner of the common room, staring at a box of toffees that glowed faintly with magic. "I'm certain that what we accidentally made by mixing a few expanding potions into toffee is brilliant," George whispered. Fred frowned. "But aside from that first happy accident, none of the batches we've brewed since have worked." "Do we just keep trying blindly?" George asked. "That would cost a fortune," Fred replied. They exchanged a look and sighed in unison. Loren padded up behind them, crouched, and peered at the toffees. "Fatine Toffee?" The twins' faces lit up. "What a name! Like it was made for this!" Fred crowed. They spun around and hooked their arms around Loren's shoulders. "We haven't pranked anyone with it yet. How did you know what it does?" George asked. Loren spread his hands. "Potions. Different potions have different properties. I noticed this toffee had several expanding potion residues aimed at the tongue, so I guessed its effect." George's first reaction wasn't to the recipe, but to another thought. Potion knowledge has cursed you, he said regretfully. You'll never be able to enjoy the wonderful candies we make. Fred agreed solemnly. The twins lamented that they could never trick Loren into eating their sweets again. Their credibility had long since been marked as untrustworthy. They set that aside and turned back to the problem. Loren, can you analyze the potion components in these toffees? Fred asked hopefully. George added, deadpan, this is incredibly important to us. No need for finished potions, just the caps of flyagaric mushrooms, the pulp of horned melons picked in July. Loren rattled off the simplified recipe. Even without him, the twins would have tried the main ingredients of an expanding potion. With a few more attempts, they'd figure it out. They scribbled his notes into their book, excitement bright on their faces as if they'd found treasure. When we mass-produce Fatang toffee, we'll make as much as you want, George said gratefully. Thanks, but no need. I want to borrow your Marauder's map, Loren said, revealing the real reason he'd sought them out. Fred readily produced an old, much-folded scrap of parchment from his pocket and handed it over. Although we don't know how you found out about the Marauder's map, you're one of us. George and I trust you. Now repeat after us. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. 179. Hogsmeade. On September 19th, the lingering summer warmth had been swept away by the autumn wind. The temperature hovered around 10 degrees Celsius, and it would be colder at night. The younger students had already traded their thin blankets for thick ones. Gryffindor Girls' Dormitory. Morning light poured through the window and fell across the room. Hermione was the only one still in bed, basking in the last moments of warmth. Her fair face looked almost translucent in the sun. Her long lashes threw little shadows across her eyelids. She slept so soundly that she pouted, the tip of her nose twitching and pulling at her slightly chubby cheeks. Even the light seemed to soften around her. The Charms Club had taken hold of her roommates, who had all chosen their favorite spells and practiced them day and night. They were already up and had gone to the Black Lake at first light to secure their spots. Repeating the same charm over and over needs the right setting. Cast charms at a wall in an empty classroom a few dozen times and you start to question everything. Who am I? And why am I doing this? Practicing by the Black Lake was different. You could cast dozens of charms and watch the giant squid play back, slapping its tentacles and sending up sprays of water that felt like a reward. It was great fun. Many of the students, especially the boys, loved it, and every day a dozen or so ended up soaked and shivering on the way back to the common room. Hermione had been practicing her shield charm with Loren in the room of requirement. Because of the nature of the spell, she had to defend against a steady stream of incoming spells, and Loren was unusually keen on that method of practice. He had a particular fondness for using binding spells, Petrificus Totalis, so Hermione still felt stiff and sore from the repeated. Out of 10 casts, she could block 5, dodge 1 or 2, and the remaining 3 left her flat on the floor. She'd given him a very stern telling-off afterwards, otherwise she would not have slept for anger. Which, given her usual discipline, made it all the more indulgent that she'd slept half an hour later than usual on her birthday. When she finally got up, she felt refreshed, though a little guilty. Birthday gifts from friends and roommates were neatly arranged by her bed. Last year, her birthday had gone unnoticed. This year was much livelier. In a year, she had made many friends, and even the roommates who'd had a rocky start with her had grown closer. Most presents were books. The image of Hermione as a bookworm was firmly established, and she genuinely liked them, stacking them carefully to be her bedtime reading for the semester. Harry and Ron had given her Honeydukes sets, the colorful chocolate frog card collector's edition, and a box of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Hermione and Loren didn't collect chocolate frog cards. They gave any extras to Harry, and when rare cards turned up, Ron and Harry would argue over them. Bertie Bott's were Ron's favorites. She suspected the gifts had been chosen with that in mind. She set the sweets beside the books and peered through the other presents with a sinking feeling. Loren wouldn't have sent her a box of cockroach clusters, would he? If he had, he'd be in so much trouble. There was, however, no gift from Loren among the pile. Hermione felt a flicker of disappointment, but also a secret pleasure. If he'd planned to give it by hand, it meant he hadn't forgotten. If he could remember last year, when they'd only just met, why would he forget this year? After washing, dressing, and doing her hair, Hermione went down to the Great Hall for breakfast. Loren arrived just after her, still rubbing sleep from his eyes and looking languid as he helped himself to the food. He saw Hermione across the room, an elegant black robe, a crisp white collar framing her face, and a Gryffindor tie in red and gold. She smiled at him, her lips pursed prettily, and hurried over with long, purposeful strides. Her hair bounced as she walked, drawing the eye along with it. She sat beside him and, bright and natural, said, "I want a sandwich, bacon, ham, and egg." Loren blinked in confusion. "It's my birthday today," Hermione added, tilting her chin up like it was the most obvious thing in the world. That was explanation enough. Loren made her a sandwich and handed it over, then asked impatiently, "Milk or juice?" "Milk," she replied sweetly. Then, curious, she asked, "Where's my birthday present?" "I'll give it to you later." "Okay." Hermione's little voice stayed light. She smiled through breakfast, even while eating, as if everything tasted a touch better. Loren speared a piece of steak, bit into it with fierce enjoyment, and chewing, said, "Next time it's my birthday, I want you to feed me." Hermione had finished and was waiting beside him, elbows on the stool and calves swinging under the table. She hummed cheerfully, entirely unconcerned by his threat. When he finished his steak, he looked up with a sharp, annoyed tone. "Come with me." "Oh," Hermione followed. "Where are we going?" "Do you know, once you're in your third year, you're allowed to go to Hogsmeade on certain weekends," Loren said. Hermione's eyes widened at once. "Hogsmeade?" She glanced around nervously, then grabbed Loren's sleeve to whisper, "But we're only in our second year, and we don't have parental signatures. It's against school rules. This week's activity week. Lots of students will be in Hogsmeade. No one will notice us." Loren had planned this in advance. Hermione's old self would have stopped such a foolish idea outright, but she was tempted, very tempted. To spend her 13th birthday on a special outing with Loren, to mingle with older students and see Hogsmeade, it was hard to resist. Still, she fretted, "We can't hide it from Filch and Madame Norris. Professor McGonagall would never let us go. Don't forget we're at Hogwarts, a school full of magic and surprises." Up the stairs, Loren reached into his pocket and took out a square of parchment, edges worn and yellowed. Hermione leaned in. Loren tapped it lightly with his wand. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." The blank page came alive. Fibers drew together into neat lines and veins. A black dot appeared in the center, and from it hundreds of ink lines shot out like a spider's web. Green cursive letters unfurled across the page: Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. Purveyors of aids to magical mischief makers are proud to present the Marauder's Map. The writing faded and thin ink lines flowed out to draw a detailed map of Hogwarts, every room and courtyard, and along those lines moved small black dots. Beside each dot, a fine row of tiny words named the person: Filch and Madame Norris, Peeves, Professor Flitwick. Hermione peered, then pointed. "It shows where everyone in the castle is." Loren nodded and tapped two little dots on the fourth-floor corridor. "Those are us. George and Fred told me there are 7 secret passages to Hogsmeade. Filch has got 4 under surveillance, and another leads under the Whomping Willow. Those 5 are hard to use. The other 2, one of them starts right here." Half an hour later, Hermione stood in Honeydukes, dizzy among shelves of gleaming sweets. The Marauder's Map, a little tap on the statue with one eye and a humpback, a winding, muddy tunnel, a long stone stair, a trapdoor lifted, and suddenly they were standing in a bright, fragrant candy shop. The whole thing felt like a dream. Loren was absorbed in the new displays, and older students chattered all around them. Under a taste test sign, a tiny description read, "Bertie Bott's Every Flavor Beans New Series, Earwax Flavor, Booger Flavor, Earwax Flavor, and Dandruff Flavor." Even Loren, who prided himself on being informed, had to admit that Ambrose Flume's imagination was something else. He glanced at Hermione, still a little wide-eyed, and reached for a booger-flavored bean. He hesitated, then switched to a salted gherkin flavor, and with a grin, pinched a bean between finger and thumb and tried to slip it into Hermione's mouth. She slapped his hand away. "What are you doing?" He looked disappointed. "Nothing. I just wanted to see what they taste like." "Then why don't you eat it yourself?" I don't think these flavors look very appealing. His smugness irritated her. She wanted to punch him, only a little, then reminded herself that they were really here. Since they'd come this far, she might as well enjoy it. The shop was packed. Older students bought bags to take back. Others nibbled on new inventions on the spot. Loren and his friends usually ordered sweets by owl and had them delivered to the castle, but nothing beat standing among the jars and tasting everything. Rows of treats gleamed, slabs of almond brittle, sparkling pink coconut ice, honeyed toffee. The air smelled sugary. There were sample trays everywhere. Loren dragged Hermione from one end of the shop to the other, tasting everything. Syrupy sweetness coated their tongues and made them grin. I like the coconut ice. Hermione's eyes sparkled. Frosting dusted her lips like a cheeky cat that had stolen cream. Loren wiped it off with his index finger, held his finger up between them, and teased. We can buy a box on the way out. Oh! Hermione pretended to bite him, but he dodged easily. As they moved on, Loren spotted the specialty candies shelf where George and Fred were inspecting a toad-shaped ice cream. He led Hermione quietly behind the twins. How does the ice cream jump in your stomach? It's brilliant. George held the toad up, fascinated. If we could figure that out, we could make puking pastilles. Fred beamed. Then Professor McGonagall will have to expel you. You can skip classes forever. Loren piped up. Ha, Professor McGonagall still likes you, even with all your mischief. Hey, happy birthday, Hermione. Fred winked at her. So Loren borrowed the Marauders map for a special birthday surprise. Don't forget we had a hand in it. Thank you. Hermione smiled, no longer shy. George tugged Fred by the collar. Come on, we've got to check Zonko's for the new stock. Let's not bother them. Have fun. Fred's voice trailed off as they left, and Hermione and Loren continued to explore the wonders of Honeydukes, the shop full of noises, colors, and tastes unfolding around them. 180. In the 3 broomsticks, whiz-bang super bubblegum, capable of filling a room with bluebell-colored bubbles. Loren set the candy label down and watched the decorative bubbles bobbing from the candy shop ceiling. They weren't only bluebell-colored, there were oleander, tuberose, violet, bubbles in every floral hue. Are these made with potions or alchemy? He asked. Hermione nonchalantly shoved a sugar quill into his mouth as she spoke. She had just bought a pile of quill, parchment, and book-shaped sweets from the next shelf. The confections didn't just look like their namesakes, they functioned like them. The books contained readable text and moving pictures. The quills had real ink and could write. Before Loren could answer, the sugar shell of the quill dissolved, and the trick ink, octopus black, burst across his teeth, tongue, and lips. Blech! Loren stuck out his tongue to get a look. Hermione laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. After a few moments, the ink faded away on its own. That's too much. There was normal butterfly pea ink over there, and you gave me a prank octopus ink quill on purpose. I grabbed the wrong one, Hermione squeaked between giggles. Answer me, are these potions or alchemy? Loren peered at the shelf of novelty sweets. The peppermint imps that made people breathe fire were chili pepper red. The fizzing whizbees that made teeth chatter were icy white. The peppermint toads whose insides felt like bouncing ice cream were peppermint leaf green. Exploding bonbons were rainbow. If one looked past the colors, one could see the glow of magic through them and running beneath the patterns of alchemical arrays. Ambrose Flume's combined alchemy and potions, Loren said. You can see traces of both. From an alchemical point of view, Flume's craft was crude, self-taught, with several nodes. Loren could already imagine improving with runes, but the idea of blending the two arts was bold. Using the pretext of studying both fields, Loren bought a large box of the sweets and had the shop owl post them to Hogwarts. They ate nearly as much as they bought and finally stepped back into Hogsmeade, satisfied and sticky from sugar. They didn't know the village well, but the streets were thronged with Hogwarts students, so they simply followed the current of little wizards to the busiest shops. Hogsmeade was decked with colorful streamers and shop banners with magically waving signs and moving creatures. Honeyduke's banner showed candy raining from a castle, while a witch rode a broom. The Quidditch shop sign had a real hovering golden snitch. A cluster of little wizards peered through that shop's display at the broomsticks hanging inside. None of them were old enough to buy a broom, yet the middle-aged owner and his young assistant smiled as they listened to the crowd's excited chatter. "Is that a Nimbus 2001? The fastest broom?" Hermione murmured to Loren. "Yes," Loren replied. "The whole Slytherin team switched to that model. It's a higher spec than many professional teams. Wood must be tearing his hair out." Hermione looked regretful. "Poor Professor McGonagall. Our hopes for the cup might be dashed again." The owner overheard and asked, "Which house do you two belong to?" "Gryffindor," they answered immediately. The assistant chuckled. "Our boss was in Gryffindor too, played Quidditch at school." "That was decades ago," the owner said, then handed them a handful of complimentary sweets, likely bought from Honeydukes next door. "Quidditch isn't only about speed. A beater needs a stable center of gravity. A keeper needs a nimble turn. Pro teams look for the same model, but everything's customized." "So we still have a chance?" Loren asked. "Plan well and your players play as one," the owner said, a nostalgic sheen in his eyes. "Back then, Slytherin bought the newest brooms themselves. I put our team in the Wollongong Zed formation with the Eagle Head attack, and we beat them handily." He sighed. "Gryffindor hasn't held the cup in years. The Lions don't have the same fire we had." The assistant leaned in eagerly. "You could ask your captain, or Professor McGonagall, if they want to buy a set from us. Since we're all Gryffindors, we could do 30% off." "No, no." Loren and Hermione backed away, giggling, and slipped into the crowd. The owner clapped the assistant on the head. "Always trying to sell. When will you stop?" "But you told me to," the assistant began, then trailed off under the owner's glare. "He was only a substitute keeper back then, not the captain." "What did you say?" the owner snapped. "A keeper is part of the team. Don't you know how important a keeper is?" "Heh, back then Gryffindor was so strong, Slytherin couldn't even organize an attack. Peeves could have won as keeper." "You!" the owner barked, and the assistant was dispatched to pinch samples from Honeydukes to refill the nearly empty candy bowl. Loren and Hermione, thinking to keep an eye on older students, followed a boy and a girl down to a tiny tea shop with pink bows on the sign. The front room was cramped and frilly and full of couples. Golden cherubs above each table occasionally showered pink confetti. It was clearly a spot for lovers. Hermione grabbed Loren's sleeve and bolted as Madame Puddifoot laughed at the sight, plump body jiggling. "They'll be back," several nearby tables predicted, and high-voiced guests laughed. In a corner, Percy and Penelope sat stirred and shy, having exchanged many letters over the summer, but too bashful to behave like the braver couples around them. On the street, others drifted toward Zonko's or the magical equipment store. Hermione pulled Loren some distance away before stopping to catch her breath. They leaned against a lamppost and dissolved into giggles at the absurdity of it. "Why were you panicking?" she asked between laughs. "Why were you?" he replied. "I thought Prefect Percy might see us," she said, and they set off again, slipping into the three broomsticks. The pub was packed and loud. Though it wasn't yet October, the fire was lit, warming the smoky air. The room teemed with students and townsfolk alike, goblins, odd creatures, boisterous adults, yet a kind of orderly chaos reigned. People kept to their business. A glass of red currant rum, a private transaction in a shadow, or a flirtation with the pub's famously attractive landlady, Madame Rosmerta. The three broomsticks' fame at Hogwarts, among the boys especially, rested as much on that reputation. Loren and Hermione queued for butterbeer and watched Madame Rosmerta serve a loud group of men. She wore a fitted dress that was never vulgar, but always suggested graceful lines, the goose yellow and rose red cut making her seem like a ripe peach. A tipsy man made a scene, and she slid a glass of violet water toward him. A few drops missed and chilled his hand, and the cold sobered him a fraction. He met her eyes, felt a queer prickling down his spine, swallowed his words, and mutely accepted the drink. From a certain angle, Loren caught a quick flicker of mockery in her expression. He realized there was more to this landlady than met the eye. They found a small table at the back. Hogwarts' house elves made butterbeer too, very sweet and milky for students, almost non-alcoholic. The pub's brew tasted similar, but had a faint fermented tang that balanced the sweetness and made it oddly Moorish. The frothy head was sugary and faintly salty. One mouthful became another, and soon both felt lightheaded and warm. Conversation slowed into a comfortable, dreamy ramble. Hermione held her glass and listened half absently as Loren mused, "Isn't everyone in Hogsmeade a bit extraordinary?" "Hmm," she answered, not quite alert. "The candy shop owner mixes potions and alchemy. The equipment in joke shops know unusual alchemy could be turned to weapons with a slight change. And Mrs. Rosmerta, she's very good at keeping a rowdy house in check." Loren's speech was softer, drifting. "She's an odd presence. She gathers gossip and influence, but if she herself lacked self-protection, someone might use her." "Oh," Hermione, pulled out of her haze by the name, clinked her glass on the table. She hadn't heard anything remarkable and slipped back into daze. Hogsmeade could be the school's defense line, location, people, all excellent. They sat and murmured in their corner, two little wizards tipsily pondering big ideas no one would overhear. In another shadowed corner, two cloaked figures were having a different conversation, one meant to remain unheard. They were easy to distinguish despite the cloaks. One was taller and sat outwardly relaxed, his sleeves frayed with threads showing. The other, smaller and more contained, wore clean suit sleeves beneath his cloak, an official. They kept their voices low, but nearby magic warded off close eavesdroppers only faintly. Anyone leaning just beyond the invisible barrier might have caught the words anyway. "You're dreaming. How could that be possible?" the sweeted man hissed, hands clenched on the table. The taller man leaned forward with a grin. "Why not? There's no better deal. Sell me the Azkaban defense plans and the Auror patrol schedules, and I'll give you 10 years' supply of Wolfsbane potion." He pressed the point. "Think about it. You need Wolfsbane to keep your life respectable. Otherwise, your lovely wife and obedient daughter will discover that their respectable undersecretary for the prison department turns into a werewolf." "Ha!" "You," the suited man spat, fury scorching his voice. "Think about it," the taller man taunted. "You despicable creatures," the official broke out. "Likewise, Mr. Undersecretary," the tall one said lightly. The man opposite, cuffs neat and face flushed, wanted to smash his glass. He noted the pub's other patrons and tightened his jaw, swallowed his anger, and set the glass back on the table.